Okay, welcome to the Southeastern Regional Advisory Council meeting. Appreciate those who are joining us online. We also have a couple of our wildlife board members who are joining us online. Gary, Paul, appreciate you guys today. We also have wildlife board member Ken Johnson in attendance here with us. Appreciate your time being here. Before we get started, we're going to have to read in an opening statement. Welcome everybody to the regional Southeastern Regional Advisory Council. This meeting is is being held in person at the John Wesley Powell Museum in the Green River, as well as being streamed on live on YouTube. This public forum allows you to express your opinions, ideas on wildlife management in our state. This RAC considers your feedback on the proposals before us today and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RACs, are charged with setting wildlife policy for the state. Wildlife management is complex and sometimes is emotionally charged. We all have ideas and opinions about what's best for you to wildlife. That's why we're here today. And that's a good thing. We encourage those who want to express their opinion today at today's meeting to fill out a comment card. Turn that in up here to Chris. We expect those in attendance to respect people who speak, especially those who hold views that don't align with their own. Respectful behavior helps facilitate efficient meetings where our RAC members can listen, digest, and address concerns, ideas, and proposals being presented for consideration. Disrespectful behavior includes booing, yelling, cheering, laughing while someone is speaking. You can also help maintain a respectful space by referring to people by name instead of descriptions of their physical characteristics, demeanor, or gender. If this behavior occurs, we will remind the attendees to be respectful. If the behavior continues, those individuals may be asked to leave. Yeah, keep it quiet at a moment. Lastly, please reduce distractions by putting your phone on silent. If you need to take a call, please step out into the other room. With that, let's go around and I know we've got Darren Olson, the RAC member, who's online. Darren's our wildlife or our Forest Service representative. Start there around to introduce the three representatives. First, Tyler Gilson, Over Large.
I'm Chris Wood. I'm the regional supervisor.
Very good. Back here, I represent sportsmen.
Charles Fisher, sportsman.
Caption is publicly large.
Sunshine for a C9 consumption.
Brad Richmond, non-consumption.
Okay, thanks. With that, I'll open it up for any motions for approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion for amendment.
Okay, we have a motion, get second.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Sunshine approved, second by Brad to approve the agenda and the minutes. All in favor? Darren?
Yes.
Okay. We'll take that as a yes. Sounds a little bit mumbled, but. Okay. Now bear with me, I'll give you, I'll run through the update on the January Wildlife Board meeting. Concerning the Utah Black Bear Management Plan revision, there was a motion made and it passed unanimously that They asked the division to work with federal land agencies to address any concerns that they may have with the use of barrels on the landscape.
Green River, could we do a quick technical check? We've lost audio at this point. Green River, system check, system check.
Can you hear us now?
We can hear you now. Thank you. Sorry, we don't know if it was something on our side, but we've got you back. Thank you.
All right. Sounds like we had some technical difficulties. The Black Bear Management Plan was passed unanimously as presented. The Elk Management Unit Plans, motion was made to approve those as presented by the division. That also passed unanimously. The Poaching Rewards Permit Rule Revision, there was a proposal made to approve the rule amendments as presented with the request to the division to add the number of poaching reported reward permits issued statewide to the annual report. That motion passed unanimously. Regarding the removal of ornamental species from the prohibited species list, motion was made to accept the division recommendation, and that also passed unanimously. And then the last motion was made just to approve moving a couple of the wildlife board meeting dates. Any questions on that? If not, we'll turn the time over to Chris for a regional update.
Good evening. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your volunteer work and time that you take to come to this meeting and be prepared for this meeting and hear all the public comment and make recommendations tonight. Guess I have a PowerPoint presentation. Maybe before I get to that, I'll mention we have a statewide mule deer plan committee that's currently meeting. Our regional RAC rep is Scoot Flannery. I think we've had 4 or 5 meetings so far, but there'll be a bunch more in the future too. So if you have ideas and thoughts about mule deer management, talk to Scoot. He's representing us. Also in our region is Kevin Albrecht. He's representing the Forest Service. So he's the Forest Service rep on the committee. So we could have a long meeting tonight, so maybe I'll just do a quick regional update. Is the PowerPoint working? Maybe I'll do some introductions too. As we know, Guy Wallace retired in December. We have a new wildlife manager, and that is Dustin Mitchell. We all know Dustin really well. He's just to replace Dustin, and that's Ian Montgomery. He's in the back. And so he has been working in the southern region. He's a graduate student at Utah State University, has done a lot of work on bighorn sheep in the Zion unit. And so we're glad to have him on board and have him in San Juan County and covering the Grand County and San Juan County as a district biologist. Okay. I don't have a clicker. Okay. All right, our aquatic section. They did a gill net at Millsite Reservoir, I think about 2 weeks ago. And in the gill net, they found Utah chub, which was not a good thing. We were disappointed to see that. It means that somebody has stalked Millsite with that chub. That's illegal. And so now we're, as an agency, trying to figure out how we can manage for that introduced species in that reservoir. Bluehead sucker is in that reservoir as well. So it makes things a little trickier and a little more challenging. But we're going to stock some splake and some tiger trout in there. Some bigger ones that hopefully will prey on that Utah chub and get those populations down. But we found several age classes of Utah chub, which means someone has introduced it a few years ago. So there's some personnel changes that I think are interesting that you'd be aware to, and it's good for you to be aware of as well. Makita Hansen, who was our habitat manager, she recently received a promotion, and she is now the migration initiative coordinator. So it's a statewide position. She'll be, there's a huge effort as our agency and as a state with all of our partners to collar wildlife species and do all kinds of amazing things. And gather all kinds of great research through that collaring and migration work. And so she's leading that effort. She's still out of Price as well, so you'll still see her hopefully quite often, but it's a statewide position. And that position is currently open, and we'll be interviewing for that hopefully in the next month. I thought I also mentioned that Sego, the Canyon Trailhead, is currently closed. It's closed for the winter anyways. It usually opens up May 1st, but the agreement that we have with the tribe, the Ute tribe, to walk through their property for about a mile into the roadless area of the Book Cliffs. There's an agreement that we have that allows the public to do that. That agreement is currently being redone, and so that there's no agreement in place. We're optimistic that we can get that agreement signed hopefully pretty soon. And there is a meeting. It sparked a lot of interest and a lot of conversation about that trailhead and maybe perhaps alternative routes into the roadless area of the Book Cliffs. And we're actually having a meeting next, is it Wednesday, I think, the 24th, to discuss with all, anybody who's interested, partners, horsemen, sportsmen, anglers, whoever's hikers, whoever's interested. We're going to meet next week at our office in the evening and brainstorm ideas on either how to improve access and current trails or how to maybe develop some new ones. Of course, BLM and SITLA are invited to that meeting. They're the land managing agencies. Our law enforcement officers have been busy as well. We have a lot of deadheads being picked up this time of year as people are out looking for sheds. One exciting thing also is at Bullfrog, they just broke ground yesterday on a dip tank. And so I don't know a whole lot about how this works, but as you know, Lake Powell is infested with quagga mussels. And so boats leaving, there's a lot of concern about boats leaving Lake Powell. And so there's a new system down there that allows people to use a dip tank. And I think they back in their boats into this dip tank and run their engines, I think, clean up their boats and then leave. And so they'll be clean as they leave Lake Powell. We have dip tanks, a few of them throughout the state, but that's one option as they leave is to get it immediately cleaned up so they can launch somewhere else. Our outreach section, there's been some changes there too. As you know, Walt Maldonado retired in January. We just interviewed and hired a new volunteer services coordinator, and that person is Ashley Kennedy. If you've ever been to our front counter in Price, you've probably met Ashley. She's fantastic. She's been working there for us for a lot of years, both in the aquatic section and at the front counter doing licensing and customer service. And she's going to bring a lot of great ideas. She'll be working in the dedicated hunter program, our events program, recreation program, and assisting Brandon in all kinds of things that have to do with recreation. Our wildlife biologists are finishing up sage-grouse let counts. I think some are just starting in some areas as well. Numbers, very preliminary numbers, but I've heard that they're pretty similar to last year or maybe slightly increased, which is good because we need to rebound from previous years where they were lower. Our biologists are also monitoring bald eagle nest along the Colorado River. There's several nests from along the river from Moab to the Colorado border. All right, and then is that it? That's it. If you have any questions, got some really smart guys in the back who can answer them. Or if you have questions for Scoot as our mule deer rep, you can take them.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Appreciate that update. With that, we'll get into our action items. Dax, oh, he's back there. He's hiding. I hope everybody had took the opportunity and time to watch the presentations online. Before we open it up to questions, Dax, do you have anything that you want to update or?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we did find, we had an oversight, a miscalculation in the recommendations that I wanted to bring to your attention. In the statewide deer plan, on the late muzzleloader, limited entry hunt on the general season units, in the plan, it says that we will give a minimum of 5, and a number of those permits would be a minimum of 5 per unit and up to 0.5% of the general season permits on that unit. And on the Monroe unit, in the RAC packet, it said 6, it should be 5. Our recommendation is 5. And on the Fish Lake, it says it was 2 higher than what it should have been. I better double check the number so I don't say it incorrectly here, but for a second time. Thought I highlighted it. Yeah, and on the Fish Lake, the recommendation was for 8 and it should have been 6. So the Monroe, in the packet, it said 6, it should have been 5. And on the Fish Lake, it said 8 and it should have been 6. So is that clear?
So is that on the Monroe, is that dropped to 4 and 1 or?
Yes,
Okay.
4 and 1.
So.
And then the Fish Lake would be 5 and 1. And then that way the recommendation is in keeping with the language in the statewide plan. We're not trying to recommend something outside the plan. It's just an oversight on our part. So apologize about that.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Open it up for, before we go do this, let me just kind of, I think we all pretty well know those who are here, but the process we'll go through, we'll open it up to questions from our RAC board. Once we get through with those, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. At that point, we'll ask Chris to give us a public comment summary. Then we'll go to public comments, if there are any, and then RAC discussion. So, okay, any questions for Dax regarding the first action item?
I'll ask one. Dax, I know you've been asked this a lot as you've gone through the RACs, but can you help us understand a little bit about how often the modeling that you guys do, where after the season is over, the buck to doe ratio counts match what you modeled? How often does that happen?
Yeah, I'll speak to that just a little bit and maybe just a little background as we jump into that. In the past with deer, I looked back through the language in like the last couple iterations of the statewide deer plan. We didn't have as good a data as we have now. Right now, we have probably some of the best mule deer survival data from the GPS collar studies that we have going on. Then I think our data is probably the envy of the West. We have really great data. That's been a big effort. A lot of partners, a lot of folks involved in that. And we figure if we have really good data, let's use it in our management. In the past, our data was more reactive. We would monitor buck to doe ratios after the seasons and then make adjustments based on what the data was saying. So if our buck to doe ratios dropped below objectives, we'd make a recommendation for a reduction, or if they went above objectives, we'd make a recommendation for an increase. And we're still looking at that, but we're putting more weight and we're looking harder than ever at our survival data and in conjunction with observed buck to doe ratios. And so what we've done for the last probably 3 or 4 years now is put a lot of weight in that survival data and looked at where is the data telling us that we will be, and we're able to run different scenarios. We put together kind of a calculator that takes this data into account: production data, survival data, buck to doe ratio, fawn to doe ratio, and we look at body condition of animals that have been captured, habitat conditions, winter conditions, and the biologists are able to, play with some real numbers to look at different scenarios. Say, okay, if we gave this many permits, where would that likely put us with regard to our buck-to-doe ratio next fall? And so we've been doing that the last 3 or 4 years with really good results. One of the examples that I probably brought this one up a few times just because it was a really big change was the Pine Valley unit. We were at 4,100 permits on the Pine Valley, I think it was. And we saw that we were really missing some cohorts and had really poor production and fawn recruitment due to drought conditions. And so we recommended, and the buck-to-doe ratio objective on that unit is 18 to 20. We recommended cutting from 4,100 permits to 1,700 permits, which is a huge cut, way more than we, perhaps ever would have done with the past system. And that next fall, the biologist classified over 2,000 deer, and the buck-to-doe ratio came in at 19. So right in between that 18 to 20. So using that tool to help inform our recommendations, it's not perfect, and there's some interpretation to be made there, but it's been working pretty well for us, and that's what a lot of our recommendations are based on that we're presenting to you today. I think we've been 90+% of the time using that calculator tool that's informed with all that data. Our recommendations come in at or maybe slightly above. We're perhaps still a little conservative, but our postseason buck-to-doe ratio the next year usually comes in right about where we thought it would be, or a little higher, probably 90% of the time.
That is when the RACs and the boards don't adjust your recommendations, correct?
Yes. Yeah, if the recommendation goes through that we make, and if not, sometimes we come in way above. And some units are harder to model than others. Units that have a lot of private land, for example, those can be a little trickier when deer distribution is really heavily weighted towards private lands. But on our units that are majority public lands, it seems to work pretty well.
Any other questions for Dax?
I'll ask a question. So with that information, that kind of begs the question on that special yellow column that the southern unit got, right? If we go with the division's recommendations, where do you anticipate that those buck-to-doe ratio numbers will come in next year on those units? I mean, there's a lot of them, so just generally.
Generally, if we go with kind of that midpoint recommendation where we said, hey, progress is better than nothing, progress, not perfection, our buck-to-doe ratios probably come in the mid to low 20s. If we went to the yellow column, and southern region kind of felt like I was calling him out with that. I just was trying to highlight it. I wasn't trying to be mean to him. If we went with that yellow column, we'd probably come in closer to 20, like right at about the top end. All the general season units in southern region are managed for 18 to 20.
Any other questions from the RAC? Tyler.
So I think one of the biggest concerns that I've heard and I've had as well is people are worried about we're hunting those yearling bucks and we're taking those out. Do you have, probably not much information regarding like the age class that's harvested every year? I know you do a few stop checks or where you stop people and check deer, but I think I remember hearing you say that you don't get a lot of data from it, but you have some.
Yeah.
So what percentage of the take would you think would be these first these yearling deer that are 2 points and spikes?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's a fair question too, because on some of these units where we're looking at really good fawn production and survival, we're anticipating a pretty big crop of yearling bucks, and that's, and so some of the recommendation is based on the idea that some folks are going to harvest those yearling bucks. We don't collect age data from general season deer. You can infer age a little bit if you look at, we do on the harvest survey reports, folks give us points per side and antler width. And it's not exact, it's not perfect, but you can kind of infer the age of deer and kind of lump them into categories, deer that are have a 10 or 12 inch or less spread with 2 or maybe 3 points per side, or less are probably yearlings. So you can build, kind of build some baskets and divvy out the data and look at it that way. I haven't done that for all the deer, but we did look at youth harvest just because we were curious and talking about some ideas on youth harvest, and about 50% of youth harvest are yearling bucks. I would imagine that non-youth hunters, it's probably a little less than that. I'm making an assumption there that older hunters are perhaps a little more selective than youth hunters, but I could be wrong. Maybe that's a wrong assumption. But so we could look at it, and again, we're kind of making some inferences based on antler size, which we have some data sets that look at age and antler size, and from check stations and stuff. So, but on general season units, it's a pretty substantial percentage of the bucks harvested are typically yearlings. So, it's probably 40 to 50% on a lot of units.
So I have another question. So everyone's worried about growing the deer herds, or at least that's kind of the theme I'm hearing, which would be kind of my concern as well. Would it be too much to ask to add in those estimated populations for each unit, or what you're expecting it to grow during that year, given the models that you have? Because you've got your estimated harvest rates, but then include, hey, here's what we think the deer unit population is, and here's where we think it could be at the end of the season, all goes well, weather, everything else.
Yeah, so in our permit calculator tool that we use to help inform our recommendations, it does provide a estimated population postseason as well. And that buck to doe ratio, because we're basically projecting the model 1 year further out under different harvest scenarios is essentially what we're doing. So yeah, that's something, we have that, we just haven't presented it. And I hope we haven't oversold the permit calculator tool. I think it's a great tool and it helps inform the recommendations. And it's not a simple plug and play exercise. And the biologists, they do, their knowledge, their experience, their familiarity with the unit and the conditions really does play into it quite a bit too. It's a lot more quantitative than what we used to have. And it's also not a crystal ball.
Dax, can you help me out here? The chronic wasting disease tags, was that under agenda item 5 or agenda item 9 when you presented that?
The limited entry deer permits for the...
No, there was some stuff in the Uinta Basin that was open for chronic wasting disease mitigation. The mite and tags, yeah.
So there's an antlerless deer hunt for that would be the later agenda item. There's also like a muzzleloader buck deer season for that as well that would be on this agenda item.
Okay, I'll wait until 9 then to talk about that.
So, but we are recommending 20 muzzleloader buck deer tags. That's kind of peak rut dates. It's a limited entry hunt for that Miton area.
Any other questions? Brad?
I have one, and it's kind of a broad general question, actually, and I don't know if you're the person, but it's in regards to all different species like deer, elk, antelope, buffalo, anything. But on the permits, there's a ratio, I'm sure, where there's resident established as opposed to non-residents. And what is that formula? And yeah, basically.
Great question. This seems to come up a lot. So we don't have a formal rule on how we allocate permits between residents and non-residents. As a practice, for a lot of years now, we've strived towards like a 90-10 split, where 90% of the permits go to residents and 10% go to non-residents. That being said, we use standard rounding practices. So, if a number is a decimal below 0.5, we round down. If it's 0.5 or higher, we round up. And on hunts, a lot of times on hunts with really small numbers of permits, if you do the actual calculations, it's probably more than 10% on some hunts that have really small numbers of permits. On a general season deer hunt with, potentially thousands of permits, it's usually really close to that 90-10.
Appreciate it.
So follow-up question to that. I understood, maybe I'm wrong, but I understood that that percentage was set by statute. Is that not the case?
It's not.
So we're not stuck with that number. We could adjust that without having to go through. Okay, good to know. Thanks. Any other questions? Tyler?
So the unit down my direction, the San Juan Abajo, what's that looking like? And because a lot of the regions got tags added, or that's what you're recommending. There was no increase in that one. What's the situation there? Or why wasn't there any recommended increase?
Yeah, and maybe I'll get Ian or Dustin to come up if they can speak more specifically to that than I can.
17.1, so just.
And I think that's probably part of why not a big recommended increase there. So.
Yeah, we went down. Anything in particular that you've seen, or predation?
Not predation wise, all of on our collar study, it's a survival unit. And so we look at all of those collared deer that have died, and it's across the board. It hasn't been one single event.
Thanks.
It's killed.
Okay, any more questions from the RAC?
So just one more, Dax, talking about that yellow column again. Is that the number of tags that if it were any other region or any other unit that would have been given to those units?
Yeah, the exception probably being some of those units that have really high percentages of private land on the unit,
Right.
like Chalk Creek, Morgan, South Ridge, East Canyon. On some of those units, the permit numbers are more just kind of set at, we feel it out till it gets to a point that kind of works, where the pressure's not overwhelming on public land. They still usually the buck-tail ratios end up a little high. But with the exception of those few units, pretty much all the other units in the state, we went with what would be that yellow column, if you put it on the other regions, would be the same as our recommendation.
So was the primary driver for that just social pressure in that unit?
Yeah, a lot of times folks say, hey, the DWR doesn't listen to hunters. You don't listen to us. And I don't know, maybe we're sending mixed messages. Maybe it wasn't the right way to approach it, but we've heard that really frequently and really loudly from Southern Utah. And so this year we said, here's where we could go. Maybe at least meet us halfway. It's a different approach. We haven't done that before. I think some folks liked it and some folks didn't, but that's what we did. And it was in response to trying to be sensitive to the pressures and the feedback that we seem to consistently get from Southern region, more so than the other regions.
Okay, we'll open up to questions to the audience. Is there any questions from the audience? Okay, if not, Chris, can you give us an online summary?
Yeah, we had 5 people answer this question. 20% of the people strongly agreed with the recommendation, 40% somewhat agreed, 20% somewhat disagreed, and 20% strongly disagreed. And maybe I'll read some of the comments we received with that survey. There was a request to split the unit, meaning the Manti unit. Buck-to-doe ratios are lower than biologists are reporting. This person supports a 2-point management hunt on the Ponsagat unit. Another person would like to see hams hunts on all general season units. Recommends the late limited entry muzzleloader hunt. We should start on a Monday. Another person said that we should not be increasing deer permits. Another person said we should be cautious with tag numbers because populations are still rebounding.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I believe we have one comment card. Kevin?
Kevin Norman representing SFW. We had our fulfillment committee meeting. We talked about everything from nuts to bolts. And, why didn't we go with the yellow numbers down to, is it too much of an increase on the Pine Valley? Ultimately, we voted to support the division's recommendations as presented. Since I got 2 minutes and 30 seconds, I want to say something else. I was in Cedar last night and at the RAC, and had to run to St. George. So I took all the back roads and some roads I've never even been on. And kind of had some cutting onions moments driving up through our state, through, Escalante and Bryce and Capitol Reef and over the Boulder, and looking at the Henrys and what a miraculous state we live in. And I'm grateful for everyone that's here, whether they're volunteering their time or being paid, that show they care and they are looking out to be good stewards of what we've been given. I think God spent a little extra time on Utah, and we're lucky to live in such a wonderful place. And I just want to thank everyone for being here.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, we'll open it up to discussion from the RAC.
Hey, Dax, before you get too comfortable, just one question I was wishing I'd asked this. When you guys make a recommendation on tags, it's based off of all those different factors, buck-to-door ratio, population, all that stuff. If you guys make a guess and put the tag recommendation to a certain number, and then the next year it's way off of what you thought it would be, how does that usually manifest itself? How do you know if it's off, I guess?
So, if our buck-to ratios came in way different than what we projected they would be, that would be a red flag. Hey, something was wrong here. We missed something. The biologists do, when we're making the recommendations, we're making it for the timeline of how the meetings work and everything. They're making those in early March. And this year in early March, we had a pretty good idea of where we were with winter conditions and survival and that type of thing. Last year in early March, we didn't know we still had like 3 months of winter in front of us. So we knew it was a rough winter, but I don't know if we knew just how long it would last. So, we do the best we can. And if anything, we tend to be a little conservative. Usually we come in above. I can't think of the last time when we had something really bomb and come in, more than maybe $1 or $2 below objective. And I think that's maybe the worst one we've had in recent history is, an 18 to 20 unit came in at 17 or something like that. So, but there is enough wiggle room in there that even if we missed by quite a bit, we wouldn't be at a biological threshold where we have a shortage of bucks, not enough bucks to breed our does. If we were really off on something and a unit came in at $12 per 100 does, obviously we'd take a really hard look at that and see what did we miss, where are we wrong. But we haven't had that happen. And even if we did at $12 per 100 does, it would be okay biologically. The hunt would probably be crummier than usual, but biologically, it's not like that's going to collapse the deer herd or something.
I don't remember which meeting it was in, but I heard you talk about how it relates to the populations and how you guys calibrate your models and all that. I don't know. I thought that was pretty useful information. It might be good if you could share that with us.
Yeah. So, and this buck permit calculator is kind of an expansion of our population models. And that's one of the questions we get asked a lot is, well, how good are your models? As a hunter, I go out there and I definitely, if we say that this unit has 12,000 deer on it or something, and hunters say, hey, I drove my side by side, end to end on this unit, and I'm a great hunter, and there's no way there's 12,000 deer there. I'm not questioning the hunter. They're probably right. They probably didn't see, a fraction of the 12,000 deer, and they probably are a great hunter and probably did cover a lot of miles during their hunt. Maybe to bore you and repeat a story that I think I told it last night. When I was first hired on as a biologist, early 2000s, I had part of my district was I had the vernal unit, the South Slope vernal, and our population model said there were about 5,000 deer on the vernal. And I went out and classified. I was really excited, gung ho, like I'm getting paid to drive around and look at bucks on the winter range in November. You know, this is crazy. This dream come true. I was psyched out of my mind about it. So I went out, I spent a lot of time. I classified. I tried to find, you know, everywhere I could possibly find deer and classified. And when I was done classifying, I think I had classified about 1,500 deer. And I thought to myself, oh man, this model must be way off if I only counted 1,500 deer and our model says there's 5,000. So I was panicked a little bit thinking like, what's going on? So I went and sat down and our population models, you know, it's basically algebra. It's not rocket science. Sat down and started putting the numbers in a spreadsheet and building it out. And essentially what you're looking at is to have the observed ratios that we had, you know, last year and the observed ratios that we have this year, when you factor in recruitment and mortality, you know, and then what would we have had to come up if we harvested this many bucks, you know, how many deer would we have had to come up with this kind of buck to doe ratio this year? Like a real simplified analogy is if you pull your wallet out, you know, you just spent 20 bucks, you count what's left in your wallet, you have $80 left, you can figure out pretty easily, oh, I must have had $100 to begin with if I spent 20 and I still have 80 left. So it's that principle. That's a real simplified version, but it's that principle. So I did the math and figured out, okay, how many deer would we have actually had to have harvested this many with these kind of survival and reproduction rates and end up at the buck to doe ratios we're at. And my calculations came out at like 4,800 deer. So it was within a couple hundred of where the model said we were. And essentially that's what we're doing to model our populations is we look at observed ratios, we look at the past years, and then we look at, you know, what was our harvest, what was our survival, what was our recruitment, what's our mortality, and how many would we have had to have for this to work out and for us to be where we are right now. I mean, that's what we do. And back in the early 2000s when I was doing it, our models were based on survival data that was collected on a study in Montana like in the 80s. And it just used constant survival rates for adults and fawns. And now, because of the collar data and the study we have in Utah, we have a lot better data to put in those models. And so our models they're still a model. They're not perfect, but they're pretty useful. And they're better than they've ever been. And every year that we continue to put really good data into the models, they get even a little bit better because they kind of build on the past years that are used to build up the estimate for where you are this year. So, and I'm maybe not the world's expert modeler, but that's kind of in a nutshell how we do it, what we do, what we put in there and where it comes from. And if we have a model and then we go out and, you know, especially with this like buck to doe ratio projection tool, and our buck to doe ratios come in way different than what we predicted they would be, that's going to tell us like something's wrong. We're missing something somewhere. And that does occasionally happen, probably more so in elk than deer, but we sometimes see that something doesn't add up and, you know, puts up a red flag and we go look at it and try to figure out what we might have missed or what we can improve on, or if there's a piece of data that we can get better data in. So, yeah.
As Chris read the public comments, the one comment about the division's buck to doe ratios and their counts, I'll be the first to admit I used to be one of the ones that would tell the biologists they didn't know how to count until I went classifying with them. And you realize that when you see 100 antlers of steer out there, you're not seeing 100 does. When you pull the fawns out of that, it changes that perspective and that what I think a lot of people see. And so, you know, over the years, I've had the opportunity to go out classifying with the biologist a few times, and I appreciate that. I actually went out this year with them, and had I not seen and helped count, I might have been back in that same boat because the count was high, but it was very legitimate. So I really appreciate the time that all the biologists put in doing those classifications. So You know, as I was driving both for work and into here, I got thinking about some of the other RACs I know have recommended increasing above what the division has proposed, maybe going as high as what you could have proposed. And although I would not be opposed either way to that, I did think, had the thought though, that if the Northern RAC proposed something for the Southern RAC and I was from the Southern region, I might have some heartburn with that, you know? But having said that, I think there's opportunity out there. One thing I think that would be very relevant is you look at the number of tags that we've cut over the years, and we're real good at cutting tags, but we're not very good at getting them back. You know, and in my, I know opinions are not what everybody wants to hear, but if we want to have more opportunity, we have to grow our deer herd. And we all like to see bucks when we're hunting. The way to get more bucks is not by cutting tags. It's by growing our deer herd. If we double our deer herd, we double the number of bucks that we have to go hunt. So, and I used to be the first one that would scream about a tag increase. Now that I've learned and see the things that I realize that those few extra tags aren't making a difference on growing our deer herd. So just my 2 cents. Any other comments?
I'll give some more 2 cents if we're having a RAC discussion. So I feel like I have a lot of feelings about this. I asked Dax to explain a little bit about the process. I super appreciated the division's effort over the last couple of years to talk more about the process, whether that's in the videos or here at the RAC meetings themselves. I think it's important that that education takes place. And I don't want people to think that I think that the division is infallible or that we're not just dealing with models, because that's not how I feel. But I do feel that we have a management plan for a reason, that we already vetted and went through and hashed out and everything else. And we agreed to it, and there's a time limit to it, so it's not set in stone for forever. And I get really frustrated when we don't stick with the management plan that we already tried to agree upon was the best way to go. And we faced that for whatever amount of reasons you want to talk about last year, where a lot of time, money, and man hours were put into following a management plan. And then in the end, we decided to disregard it. And part of the problem we're facing this year with the already recommended number of tag increase and potentially even greater is because we were unwilling to follow the plan last year. So now there's dues to be paid this year. And so I personally would be very in favor of trying to more greatly and better follow what the management plan and the recommendations are. And I know that's probably a bitter pill for some of our regions, but I mean, I would like to state that I've hunted the southern region my entire life. There are multiple units down there that we deer hunt every single year. We always have, whether we were living down there or not. And I can understand that a certain region might feel frustrated when other people are giving recommendations about how things should be ran in their region. But the thing is we hunters hunt the entire state. What happens in one place affects another. The opportunity for what's going on in the southern region, whether it goes up and down, it affects people that live all over the state. And the reason that we have these racks is so that we can get some input from the collective about what is going on. And so again, I do not think that the division is infallible, but I have a little bit of a track record here of showing that their modeling works. We have a management plan that we all agreed upon. So I would definitely be very in favor of trying to more greatly follow that management plan and maybe have a conversation about the recommendations for the southern region being what the model says they should be. But I do appreciate that the division has tried to listen and come up with a compromise. I think it's always good to show your willingness to hear what's going on.
Thanks, Cash. Any other comments? I appreciate what Cash says, and I don't disagree with that. I mean, I do kind of think that the division, like Cash said, has listened. They knew there was going to be a very large public outcry for a huge increase. But because of the no increase last year, it's very warranted. That being said, you know, I'm not opposed to the approach the division has taken, especially knowing that we have a deer committee that's convening right now, and we don't know what kind of potential changes may be coming out of that with the recommendations that will follow. So I'm not opposed to the division's recommendations. Not saying that I wouldn't be in support of, you know, following the plan more closely either. So any more comments? If not, we'll open it up for motions.
Just one comment. I'd like to echo what Cash said. I think it's really important that the reason it's in our RAC packet is because they want our input, and it is affected. Everything that happens in that southern unit or any other unit for that matter affects the rest of us. You know, if somebody says, I know I'm not going to draw a tag where I normally would have hunted, so where else can I put in? Where else can I go hunt now? And then it affects every other unit in the whole state. And so if we're kind of arbitrarily changing those numbers outside of the management plan that's been decided upon, I mean, the amount of study and research and effort that has been put into this and the dollars that go into it, we just have so much of a better picture nowadays than we used to, and how it's affected, how it just affects all of our deer herd. And I just think that that's very commendable for the division and the other people that are putting in a lot of work to this. And so I just think that it's really tough to just push that aside and say, we know what the plan says, but here's what we're going to do. And I worry that it's just going to be a compounding problem if we don't go with what the recommended tags could be in some of those units, that we're just going to be back here next year trying to address an even bigger problem.
Okay, do we have any motions? Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion that we accept the division's proposal as recommended with the adjustment that for the southern region, the proposed model numbers are the ones that are used for the tag allocation.
Okay, we have a motion. Any questions on the motion? I actually do have a question, maybe just a clarification. Dax, can you tell us, I know the only ones that were highlighted were the southern region, but were there other regions throughout the state that had the same scenario, a higher number that could have been recommended but weren't, or was it specifically the southern units?
Pretty much every other unit in the state, we followed basically the calculator, the model, with the exception of like some of those really heavily 50+% private land units, like and they also had really big winter losses on those units last year too. But with that exception, yes, we basically used what is the yellow column for the southern region units for all the other units in the state.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions on the motion?
I just need a clarification. So you're saying accept it as presented, but in the southern region, go with the yellow, the higher recommendation. Okay.
We have a second on that motion?
So just help me understand, Cash, the yellow section was the one that could have been allowed within the plan. I'm just trying to remember the video here. But you guys took it back because of public pressure from the southern region. Okay. I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Cash to accept the division's recommendation as proposed with the exception of the southern units. And we would go with the numbers that the model indicates should be recommended. We have a second by Charles. Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion, raise your hand. Darren, are you a yes or no? Didn't hear you, Darren. You might have to turn your camera on.
How about now? Yes.
There you go. Now I got you. He said no. You say yes or no, Darren? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So.
Yes.
And opposed? Okay, a motion passes 6-2. Sunshine and Tyler, would you guys like to clarify why you've opposed it?
I guess I just want to say that I'm in support of the approach that the division has taken.
I would agree with Sunshine. And just, I know the term logical approach has been thrown out, but there is a lot of data out there. I've been able to look at it a bit. The vote last night was a bit split, but I would prefer their RAC vote on their region. I mean, that's their bread and butter. I get your point about we all hunt all over the state, but I mean, they know their place, and I think I would, I know it passed, but I think I wouldn't want it to, but they voted to accept the recommendation as is and not go with the higher levels or the higher numbers in the yellow column, that infamous yellow column.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, we will move on to action or agenda item number 6, once in a lifetime permit recommendations. Rusty, you're in a hot seat. Anything that you would like to clarify before we open it up to questions?
Yeah, this is just, this is our permit recommendations for all the once in a lifetime species for the 2024 hunting season. We recommend permits based on their respective statewide plans for each species. Some of the highlights in here are lowlights in some cases. We're hunting the Mineral Mountains this year for the first time, so that's exciting. Recommended 2 permits there. We are recommending pretty significant decreases on the high Uintas mountain goat hunts, as those populations experienced some pretty big reductions with last winter. Those goats got hit harder than others. And then bison permits were recommended pretty deep cuts on both the Book Cliffs and the Henry Mountains. The Book Cliffs, because we were dealing with some concerns in the roadless portion of the Book Cliffs, and we've committed to the board to reduce permits in there until we can kind of reevaluate our overall hunt structure in there. And maybe not apply so much pressure back to back to back. We've had some issues pressuring the bison out of there where they're inaccessible to hunters. And on the Henry Mountains, we're recommending some decreases so that we can get closer to the overall population objective that's outlined in the unit plan. So it's kind of addition by subtraction there, where we're trying to grow some bison, get closer to our objective, and we've got to make some cuts to do that. But with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we'll open up to questions from the RAC.
I just had a question about your mountain goat estimates.
Yes.
Can you kind of explain how?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We'll get to you, Darren. Sunshine's talking right now.
Explain how we get our estimates,
Or any issues that there might be with the estimates?
Yeah, so every 2 to 3 years, closer to 3 usually, we fly each mountain goat unit, and we kind of rotate through the different units in the state and try to fly them on a 3-year cycle. We count the mountain goats we observe, and we classify them by, adult or kid, and then we recommend permits based on the number of counted adults. The Hyuinas units we flew this past late summer, early fall, and we found that across all those subunits, they were down about 25 to 30% from the last time we flew. And so and we had some callers up there and learned as last winter was going on that we're losing some goats to winter mortality. And so we attribute that to our overall population declines. Did that answer your question? Thanks.
Any other question, Brad?
Kind of related to that, do you say that as a short-term or a long-term kind of a projection on? Can you anticipate that at all?
I would anticipate as a short term, where it was a real proximate, climatic event that did it, and we assume they'll rebound from that.
Okay, Darren, you had a question?
Yeah, I noticed one of the commenters mentioned about the North San Rafael bighorn sheep, and 2 of those tags going to either the auction or the expo tags. Any response or comment to that?
Yeah, I recall reading that comment. It helped me out, Darren. Was it kind of concerned with, so few tags overall, and 2 of them were going to either expo or conservation permits? Was that kind of the comment?
Yeah, only four tags on that unit, and then 2 additional going out of that unit, 2 of them going to the expo or auction. So yeah, I'm just curious, division's comments on that. Why that unit? Why 2 when there's 4 total that goes to the public? Yeah,
that's a great question, and maybe Lindy has the expo permit list in front of her. Maybe she can fill in the gaps if she has any more to add. But I don't recall what the permits were there 2 or 3 years ago, but we set those permits on a 3-year cycle, and these conservation permits, and don't quote me on this, but it could have been there was more permits on the unit when we set those, and now they've kind of declined over time, and then then we relook at it and do a new 3-year cycle. So Wade, any clarification on that? I mean, I don't know if I can only imagine. We had more tags a couple years ago when we recommended conservation permits. Oh, go ahead, Lindy. Thanks.
Yeah, so that would be probably the reason why I'm pulling up permit numbers to see what it was 3 years ago for a conservation. Expo permit that's been taken out, that was approved last September. And at that time we didn't know the permit recommendations. And so that's the reason why that one's coming out this year. But I'll pull up the permit numbers from 3 years ago and see the trend if it was up or not. So.
But I guess to sum it up, Darren, we typically try to recommend those conservation permits on units that have, higher numbers of permits. And we also kind of try to rotate through them so that there's, it's not the same ones year after year after year.
Okay, thanks.
Any other, Scoot?
Yeah, thanks. So, on the San Juan River Desert Bighorn Sheep unit, that's the only one that has one tag. When you're determining that number of tags, I guess, how close are we to getting 2 tags there?
Dustin could probably come up and help me out with this, but we recommend permits based on 2 different sets of sideboards. So when we fly it, we count the overall number of rams regardless of age. And then when we also count the rams that are 6 years old and older. And so we have 2 different sets of sideboards for, that the biologist can choose from. In this case, both sets of sideboards were between 1 and 2. I think on the side of caution, but I'll let Dustin, San Juan biologist. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, my name's Ian Montgomery and I'm the new San Juan and LaSalle District Bio, but I'll take this one. Scoot, we met not too long ago about it, but Rusty was exactly right. So 1 permit was at the low end of our management recommendations and 2 permits was at the high end. And we went with the more conservative one for a few different reasons. So first, we're dealing with low numbers. So we only counted 4 rams that were in that class 3 to 4 age class. So even if we did go up to permits, that's 50%, which is in our sideboard, but that leaves you with 2 rams in the upper age class. Recruitment's also been fairly low on this unit the past few years. So it's an MOV positive unit. We've had pretty poor recruitment. We actually didn't count any yearling rams on this survey this past fall. And like Rusty said, we fly every 3 years. So we're trying to make our recommendation knowing that we're only going to get counts every 3 years. So the fact that we don't have any of those younger rams in 3 years, if we're over harvesting, we're going to be hurting in a few years. Like I said, 2 permits is at the upper end of that recommendation level, but we opted to go with a more conservative approach. And the other piece of that too is one of the 4 older age class rams we counted had Navajo ear tags and collar, and the ram that was harvested last year was also a Navajo sheep. So we see quite a bit of movement back and forth between the Navajo side and the Utah side. So we weren't sure, we don't know what's going to be available come the hunt because of that movement back and forth.
I know it's impossible to give out 1.5 tags.
Yeah.
Could it be supported by you and Dustin or whatever to potentially do 2 tags every other year?
Yeah, we discussed that and Dustin and I talked about it after our meeting, and it's totally reasonable. Like I said, 2 permits is in our, both 2 and 1 are within our sideboards. The concern was hurting ourselves going forward, but it's a reasonable and could definitely be supported.
Thank you.
Bet.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the RAC? I have a question maybe for Lindy. Lindy, as we looked at, and I've talked with Rusty and with Wade about this, the bison permits and the way that it's divvied up, we're giving a pretty fair amount to our non-residents because of the big cuts that we're taking. And Rusty did a great job of explaining that those non-resident tags have to be set in the fall because we have to know if there's going to be a draw for that unit, especially when there's only one tag. That means either there's a draw or there isn't. So I understand that. As I've talked through this with some other people, question come up, is there any way, and it may be a financial burden, I don't know this, but it's worth asking the question, is it possible to move that non-resident draw for limited entry to a later date? Basically, it would be a separate time and draw. That's the only way that we would be able to know those things without trying to set those tag numbers when we don't have all the information. Is that a possibility, or is that a huge financial burden? What?
Probably all of the above. It would be a big financial burden, but moving the non-resident and trying to get their permits and the application period in time for the hunts to start, because we do have some bison hunts that start in August that go until, the next year with antlerless draw, and then the crane draw, landowner permits, over the counter sales day. It would be a hard fit to squeeze all of that in. We would have to look at everything, but like I said, I would have to work with my contractor. Me personally, I wouldn't recommend it, just because these guys also do apply for other species. And so it would be like completely like if you did non-resident limited entry and deer, I think it would cause some complications and some confusion if we split it up. Because people do apply with non-residents and residents for limited entry and general season deer because they like to hunt with their family. So that would be something we'd have to consider. So I think there would be more complications added to it if we did that.
And Eric, maybe I could propose an alternate solution. Because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and as Dax mentioned, it's a practice that we set the units where we think we're going to have enough permits for a non-resident, and we set that in the fall. And then we actually set the permit numbers in spring. And now that we're going to multi-year, where we set the season structure for multi-years in the fall, then permit numbers can change over time. And then, we're left with kind of what we see where, we're 5-1 on all these other hunts. So that's been the practice. And I think we can do a better job of both making it a true 10%, and also probably benefiting non-residents as well. And what I mean by that is I think we can take some of these hunts and lump them a little bit more so that we know there's going to be 3 any weapon hunts on a certain unit. Maybe we just do the non-resident permits on one of those hunts, and we get a true 10% of what we're recommending across those hunts, and then put it on the one hunt. So it's closer to a true 10%. So that benefits residents. It's also, more bonus permits. So it benefits non-residents. And I think that's a potential solution that might make sense moving forward. And we'll take a look at that next year and see if that makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah, that was also part of the conversations we had actually talked about, that potential, and maybe with those non-residents, I think we do it with sheep where you actually let them hunt multiple hunts.
Yeah, we've done it with sheep and we've done it with goats. Yeah. And like bison is the one that stands out where we got, 2 units with multiple hunts on the units. I think we can do a better job of maybe lumping those and loading 1 or 2 or 3 of those hunts with the non-residents and making it closer to 10%, and the non-residents get more bonus permits in there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rusty. Appreciate that.
I got a question on Book Cliffs, Little Creek South, bison. I see 30 permits on there. If this doesn't get worked out with the tribe and we can't get through Sago Canyon, we don't find an alternate route, is there a plan for the people that have drawn those permits? I know they have a larger area than the roadless area, but most of the bison spend their time in the roadless area. And if they're not in the roadless area, they're usually on the tribe. I know that, at least from what I've heard in vernal, tribal relations have been difficult recently for access. So I'm just a little concerned about those tags and people that might draw them.
Yeah, and there's still alternate access points. We can still access on the north and 10 Mile, which is, potentially longer to get where you want to be, depending on where you want to be. But for now, we're just trying to get the word out as much as possible that, hey, if you're planning on applying for one of these hunts, just know that access might be more difficult. But yeah, as far as that, there's no alternate solution to cancel these hunts or anything like that. Where if people want to hunt and they're willing to work hard and maybe find an alternate access point, then we're gonna let them do that.
Okay, yeah, and then I guess I'm not very familiar with the 10 Mile access, but how far is it into the roadless area from the 10 Mile access there?
It's a steeper drop initially, and then, like I said, you could be closer to bison, or if you're trying to get closer to the south end, it could be a long ride. But it's a totally legitimate access point. Dax probably knows a lot more about it than I do, but is that accurate?
It's right on the border.
It's
Okay, yeah, and then I guess my thought is getting a bison out is more of my concern.
Yeah.
With something like that, when you're giving these tags and then expecting people to take this meat out and not waste the resource. I mean, you're gonna need horses, and even horses might struggle with that.
I think anytime you're trying to break down a bison and get it out, we encourage people to bring everything you need, as many friends as horses as you need to not spoil that meat.
So I got to watch the Central Region RAC, and I thought there were some good questions asked about the North Slope bull moose hunt. Is the division sticking with their recommendation for that, or can we increase some opportunity there?
Yeah, just so everyone's aware, I believe last year the permit, were 19 permits on the North Slope Summit moose hunt. Let me find it here. And we were recommending an increase from 19 to 22. The age objective for moose is between 3.75 and 4.25, and we're at about a 6-year-old bull in that harvest right now. And so we're over our age objective. It calls for an increase. We recommended a 3 permit increase. The biologist was hesitant to go more because they're seeing, maybe recruitment hasn't been great in the last couple of years, things like that. But I will say, with this system, with going with the age objective, it's really a reactive system. And so if you overshoot it and you bring the age, way down, you can then reduce permits and correct for it the next year. So it kind of corrects itself over time. And so yeah, the Central Region recommended an increase, I think, to 25. And I don't know, I wouldn't say our biologist was comfortable with that, but that was a motion they made that I believe passed. And yes, and it's reactive. And so if we do overshoot it, if that's what the public wants to see is more permits on that unit, then we'll be okay biologically. We can correct for it next year if needs be.
Okay, any other questions from the RAC? No, we'll entertain questions from the audience. Okay, no questions there. Chris, can you give us a summary from the online?
Yeah, we had 3 people answer this survey question. 33% strongly agreed, 67% somewhat agreed. We had 2 comments. One comment was in regarding to what Darren mentioned about the expo permits, and the San Rafael North unit. Thanks for covering that, Darren. The other a comment was they were concerned about late December and January bison hunts. They're concerned about safety issues and road issues, and they'd like to see those hunts be kept as early as possible.
Okay, do we have any comment cards? Kevin?
Kevin Norman representing SFW. I won't bear my testimony this time. SFW supports the division's recommendations as presented. One thing I'd like to point out is it was, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, we were battling it out here to get sheep on the minerals, and sheep are on the minerals, and there's a couple tags up for grabs this year, and pretty cool thing, and create more opportunity for people to hunt sheep. And thanks to a bunch of you guys who are here making that happen. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, we'll open it up for RAC discussion. There's no discussion, Scoot.
Well, I was just giving people a chance. No. The reason I brought up the questions about the desert sheep tag on the San Juan is obvious. I mean, when you jump from that 1 to 2, it's not just one more opportunity, it's a bonus opportunity. So it goes to the high permit holder. Somebody who has those points can actually plan on hunting that unit. If it's not taxing on the, on the herd or anything, I would love to see that at least vetted out thoroughly. I'm not married to it one way or the other, but if it's whenever there's a possibility to jump from 1 to 2 to allow that option, even if it's every other year, I think it's a good thing to look at.
Good point, Scoot. Any other comments?
Just to add to that, I'm super appreciative of the once in a lifetime hunt opportunities we have here in Utah. And one of the things I love about them is, generally speaking, how extremely high our success rate is. So if you do finally get that opportunity, you're going to have a pretty dang good chance of filling your tag. But with that too, I do think it's important for us to eke out any other additional permits that we can get where we can still biologically be safe for the herd. So I would be willing to see that North Slope Summit Moose permits get pushed just a little bit more. If we went from 22 to 25, we would add 3 more tags for once in a lifetime hunt. And I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you look at these species, and a lot of them, we only give out 100 permits or less, 3 more tags is a lot. So that'd be something I'd be willing to entertain.
Rusty, I typically try to watch some of the other RACs, but I could not this round. And so I'm not opposed to what he's saying. I guess one question I would have was, does the division, especially the biologists in that area, is that something they could, get behind and support?
Yeah, and we'll be okay. Like I said, it's a purely reactive system. You're kind of, it's a trial and error thing. If you're over age objective, you increase permits a little bit, see if it comes down. If it doesn't come down, maybe increase a little more. And so, yeah, it's well within biological sideboards where it's not an issue. So with that said, there was, he did have some concern over future recruitment. And so maybe we see that age drop, and it could drop drastically. And we could, so, in the future, those permits may drop drastically as well. So
I just was wondering if you would also be in support of increasing the mountain goats.
In the hyenas, that one a little more biological, where we're seeing such big, population decreases, over the past winter. That was really the extent of what the biologist felt comfortable recommending. And that one's not based on age class or anything. It's based on the total number of adults that we're seeing. And so, we don't want to harvest above a certain percent
of those.
Thanks, Rusty. Any other comments? Anybody want to make a motion?
I guess I could make a side motion on the San Juan South. I would like to see that thoroughly explored every other year, 2 tag, as long as it's supported. He said we're right between the 1 and the 2. Could go either way. It seems like not much of a compromise to do it every other year and still be within their parameters. So I would make that motion for the San Juan South. Sorry, not the San Juan South, the San Juan River unit. It's the southernmost one. It makes sense that it would be south, right?
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do we have any?
So is that 1 permit this year or 2 permits this year?
I'll let the biologists make up their mind on that one.
So
let's go 1 this year, but then bring it back with 2 next year.
And I think that's a good option because basically the draw is already over this year.
Right. It's
Essentially.
very much underway. So
Yeah,
I'd be
so,
perfectly fine with that.
okay. All right.
So just to clarify, Scoot, you're asking them to follow the management plan that they're currently doing?
You know what? I guess this is within the management plan, but it's always 1 tag or 2 tags. But I'm thinking every other year since you can't do 1.5.
Yeah, 1.5 would be hard.
Mhm.
I guess I like the biologist being able to follow the management plan. So if there is a problem with recruitment or numbers, I would feel hesitant to support saying go every other year. I like mentioning that the RAC is really supportive of being, I don't know, I just lost the word, like going higher, offering the 2. But it feels a little awkward to make a motion going 1 tag and then 2 tags. Because what if the model says to do something else?
Yeah, that's a good point. And so I would say that, with that, just to add some discussion to that, if next year came back and said it's a lot closer to 1 than 2, then definitely don't go 2.
Scoot, can I ask a question on the motion? I mean, do you feel comfortable about getting into the game of recommending future tag allocations? Because that's kind of what we're talking about, right? Instead of having, instead of having a vote on what are we doing this year, the motion kind of sounds like to me like we're having a vote on what you should do next year. And I even with the discretion that's given, I'm wondering if we really want to get into that realm.
Yeah, and so that's a really good point too, Cash. I guess the thing is if it comes back and every year it's between 1 and 2 and every year we go 1, then that opportunity is never there.
Totally agree. So I guess I'm not telling you to change your motion. I would feel more comfortable with just saying, let's do 2 this year and give it a try. And then next year, if it's looking good, let's do 2 again. But I would rather make a decision on this year's tags, not next year's tags. That's all I'm
saying. Can we do that? The draw is open at the moment. And I mean
the wildlife board was not hesitant at all last year to completely change tag recommendations. Zero hesitation, and it affected everyone's draw.
Most of which came from deer.
Yeah.
That was where most of the energy was, but this is a pretty dynamic unit, I think, especially where sheep are crossing back and forth to the Navajo. What are the Navajo tribe doing? Are they harvesting? Like, there's a lot of information here that I don't know. I'm sure they know more than I do, but I wouldn't feel comfortable throwing 2 at it this year.
Rusty, you...
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, just sitting back there thinking, I don't want to have a vote today about what the permits we're going to set next year. And so I think today, let's decide on this year's permits. And then next year, if we, and the biologist and manager are committed to looking real hard and trying to do 2 next year already. So maybe next year, if we come with a recommendation of 1, then remind us and change it, in this same setting then. But either this year or next year, but let's make decisions on this year and keep it simple. I've got a bad memory, and I know in a year, I probably won't remember what we were supposed to do.
Rusty, can you speak to, I think, Dana's question about whether 2 would fall within the management plan?
2 would fall between the plan. Both sideboards had between 1 or 2 permits. And like I said, yeah, 1 is where biologists felt comfortable this year, and they're committed to recommend 2 next year if everything's still looking the same.
So do you know if the ram that was harvested, there was one ram harvested last year, was it tagged as a Navajo ram?
I believe the answer to that is yes. Yes. Ian's nodding yes.
I know this is kind of a sidebar, but I feel like it's an opportunity for closer co-management with the tribe. And I would think that would be really important, not just for this species, but for lots of other species.
I usually fall on the side of giving more tags, more opportunity. This one, just listen to Mr. Montgomery talk here, though the herd's got disease in it. They didn't see any yearlings. Didn't want to count sheep that were crossing over the river. It just, to me, sounds like 1 might be the best idea for this year. And then we reevaluate next year when they fly it again and figure out what the population is like.
Also, just to clarify, we fly on 3-year cycles. We just flew it. So next year would be recommending permits based on the same numbers as this year.
So we'd have no new data coming out.
No new data unless something drastic got brought to our attention, like a die-off or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, this is a tough one because I have reservations about voting for this year because the draw is essentially over. And if we add a second permit, that could change. I see you, Darren. Hang on a second. I mean, there's a lot of people who have already put in, and this won't be approved by the board until after the fact. If there's a second permit there that would go to full point holders, that could change things dynamically for some people. So I understand the concern about voting for next year, but where we're in a 3-year cycle, we don't have anything new. I don't see as much harm in that. Voting for next year where we're not going to have any different information, I guess.
A lot of us will be here next year, and I don't think we'll forget. And I'm sure Ian will be around, so I'm fine with leaving it the way it is, and then coming back next year, and hopefully Ian comes back with 2.
So do you want to rescind your motion?
I guess I do.
Thanks, Darren.
I guess, yeah, clarifying question. Won't that be the case every year? I mean, wouldn't we be voting this time of year? And so every year we're going to have the same scenario? It's during the draw?
Yeah, that's why I guess my hope would be that he comes back with a recommendation of 2 next year. But apparently we can't recommend that. So we just have to hope that that's what happens.
Yeah, and that was my point too, Darren. I realize we'll be in the same point next year, but at least they would have at that point what is being recommended. It may not be approved, but they would have what's recommended. Lindy, you act like you have something to say.
Just I want to help just some of this thing. So for this decision, for this talk, we do put on the hunt planner that they're proposed numbers. So people that are applying currently right now do know they're not set in stone. They can change, just like as we all know, law general season deer permits changed last year. People can go in and edit their applications, like tonight after this conversation. It does close next Thursday, but that's the last time you can edit your app. But they, based on this conversation, if they're hearing what's going on, they can still alter their application. But just wanted to let you know that people do have that flexibility currently right now to do that kind of stuff. And we do put as proposed. We don't say these are set in stone anywhere. Because we know the RAC and board process, things can change regardless if it's general season to once in a lifetime permits.
Yeah. Thanks, Lindy. And I recognize that as well, but I guess my point is, even though we may recommend it now, yes, they can go in and edit it, but by the time the board meets to approve these, that option is gone, so.
Yeah, and the recommendations will still show one, right? Even if, no matter what we decide tonight, it's going to show one tag. And so, I mean.
Yeah, unless they're listening tonight to know that there was something recommended, they won't know that.
Hey, I could sneak in and get this tag with 19 points. I'm just kidding. So yeah, I rescind that. I would just like to see it for, in consideration for next year. We got the right people in here that can make that happen.
Okay, that's off the table. Took the long way around, but
I'd
we're
like to
open
make
for
a motion.
other motions.
I'd like to
Sunshine.
make a motion to support the recommendations as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Sunshine to accept the division's recommendations and seconded by Cash. Sorry. I knew it come from this side over here. My apologies. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Okay, let's have a vote. All in favor? Darren says yes, that passes unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to item 7, elk permit recommendations. Dax, you're back up. Any clarifications you'd like to make before we open it up for questions?
I guess just a reminder that we implemented a new statewide elk plan 2023, the fall of 2023. So last year was the first year with the new statewide elk plan. Had some changes to general season and also limited entry. Some new seasons in general season, a youth permit, and then also in the limited entry world, we adjusted the age objectives a little bit and changed the permit splits into the different seasons. Added some of the mid-season rifle hunts on some units and a late archery hunt. It was great to get the data. Hope you're able to watch the presentation and let me know how I can help facilitate a good discussion. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Dax. With that, we'll open it up to questions from the RAC.
How did the permit changes, the unlimited general bull permits, and then the new units that were put in, how was that perceived? Did you guys get any data from that? What did that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We went through some of this at the Wildlife Board work session the other day. Let me pull up a few of the numbers. It was kind of interesting. Some neat things. As far as in the past, the general season any bull hunt had a quota of 17,500 permits on it. With the new change last year, that quota was reduced to only 15,000, but the season was split. It was almost a 2-week-long season before, and it got split into 2-week-long seasons. That 15,000 permit quota was for the first week, and then that second week was unlimited over the counter. All 15,000 of those sold. Folks purchased those. About 12,700 went as any legal weapon. The other 2,300 were sold as muzzleloader permits for that 15,000 for that first week quota. And the late season, that second week, there were about 4,800 of those permits purchased. So 4,800 people got to go hunt any bull elk. So there were about 4,900, a little over 4,900 youth elk permits. And then they were able to hunt both any bull units or spike units. They just had to follow, and all the season dates, they just had to follow whatever the applicable regulations were on the units where they hunted. One of the kind of neat takeaways that I thought from that was, of all the permits that were purchased last year, 23% of those were a first elk permit for folks. That was the first elk permit they had ever purchased. 35% of those, any legal weapon, the late, any bull hunt, 35% of those were folks' first ever elk permit, and over 50% of the youth elk permits were their first elk permit. So I feel like it was successful, added some new opportunity for folks and let some folks get out there and hunt elk. Success rates weren't super high. They usually aren't for those hunts. They're hard hunts, but hey, you're hunting elk, you're hunting big game, which is neat.
And then I guess you probably can't tell, but did you see any interest in those new units that were created, the new Any Bull units? Anybody hunting those? Any success?
Yeah, you know, just kind of like an anecdotal take from what I heard from folks. You know, we saw there were definitely folks that were excited and came out. I mean, the reality is most of the units that we recommended converting from a limited entry unit to a general season unit, it wasn't because they were, you know, kicking butt and taking names as a limited entry unit. It was because they kind of struggled as a limited entry unit. So I think some folks came out and realized, you know, I live out close to the anthro unit, and the folks came out and hunted anthro and said, whoa, that was hard. We didn't see any elk. I said, yeah, that's part of why it became an Any Bull unit instead of staying in limited entry. But I heard of a few bulls harvested on that unit and units like the Ochre Stansberries. And so, you know, I think folks tried those, and I think some people were surprised that they were maybe harder than they thought they were going to be. It wasn't a slam dunk, but heard of some success. And yeah, that's kind of an anecdotal take on just what we heard from folks.
Thanks for that.
I got a couple of questions, Dax. One of my big concerns with that plan was the Ponsagon, and how that would affect, you know, the people who had limited entry deer permits. Do you guys get any feedback on how things went down there? I'm just curious if you saw a lot of conflicts or if there was went smooth.
I didn't hear anything from the region. It doesn't mean that maybe folks in the region heard some things that didn't get passed on to me, but nothing that really escalated. Yeah, I didn't hear anything from anybody down there. And I don't know if anyone from Southern Region's on the call tonight that can speak to that, but nothing that really got escalated to the point where, you know, we had a bunch of calls or meetings or anything. So.
Okay. The other question I had, do you have an idea, I'm sure you do somewhere, if it's not too hard to look, the success rates on those late season archery elk hunts? Curious how that went.
Are you wanting to know unit specific or overall?
Just kind of overall.
So overall, I think it was between 16 and 17% success rate for the late season, that December archery limited entry elk hunt.
Pretty low then.
It's pretty low.
Yeah.
It was a hard hunt, and we kind of knew that going into it.
That's what it was designed for, to get some
Exactly.
opportunity and not
Something
take
really,
a big effect.
really challenging, you know,
Yeah.
an adventure for the bull to take a shot. Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Can you talk a little bit about the difference in success rate between the unlimited Any Bull hunt and the early Any Bull hunt?
Yeah, I've got those numbers right here. The early one was 11.8% success. The late one was 9.4. So couple percentage points lower for that later hunt. Both fairly low.
Right. Okay, and then can you help me understand a little bit if there's any difference between how often you do counts for elk on limited entry units versus how often you do counts for elk on Any Bull units?
There's no difference. So our plan is to count our elk herds. We try to count them every 3 years, do a helicopter count. We model in the in-between years. And then, yeah, and that's the same consistent. Sometimes it's more than every 3 years if we don't have good weather conditions. We don't have good snow conditions. We don't feel like we can get a good count. Sometimes we'll put it off a year. But typically that's what we shoot for. And it's the same, whether it's a general season, you know, Any Bull unit or a limited entry unit.
So, and then would you say that the division is confident in their statewide elk population estimate?
It's a pretty good estimate. It's an estimate, but it's pretty good. We don't have as much data on elk as we do on deer. So, you know, and elk lend themselves to being counted, you know, an aerial count in the winter a lot more so than deer do, just based on concentration distribution. So, you know, there's pros and cons if you're weighing, you know, deer versus elk. Elk do lend themselves to being counted better whereas we have better data on deer for doing a model. I think the estimates are okay. Have you ever been on elk flights? We need to get you out there maybe.
Yeah, apparently I need to go.
Do you get airsick easily? We'll find out.
Okay, sweet.
Any other questions from the RAC? Brad?
Yeah, and I don't know how to phrase this exactly without showing my ignorance, but most people already know how ignorant I am, so. But, so I'm curious, I've spent a lot of the last 15 years during the summers, and it seems to me in the earlier years, so last 15 years, earlier on, it seemed like there were more big bulls, and I'm wondering if it's a migration thing or if it's an age thing, a genetic related age thing. And so that, and where I'm kind of going with this is do we need to make an adjustment to the age management factor? Or do you see anything to that? Or is it just, as I said, I'm ignorant to it all?
Oh, it's a good question. It's probably a fair observation. And if you look back 15, 20 years ago, we were really conservative with how we hunted, especially limited entry units, limited entry bulls. And there was a period of time there where it seemed like the state record for, Boone and Crockett record would get broken, maybe a couple times even a year. And in order to manage at that level and have so many bulls that we would end up having those giants in the population, we did not give very many permits. We were really conservative. And we've shifted over the last, 15, 20 years to where we give more permits. We do hunt our limited entry units more aggressively than we did in the early 2000s, so that might be part of it. To just full disclosure, being totally honest, when I first started working in Northeastern region on the Wasatch unit in the early 2005, 6, 7, I think we gave about 200 limited entry elk permits. In the last 4 or 5 years, we've given almost 1,000. So with more pressure, you don't see as many of those just gigantic anomaly bulls. We do still harvest, fairly old bulls, and some of those bulls are really big and some of them aren't as big. Some of the data that we took into consideration when we looked at the revising the age objectives in the statewide elk plan is that most bulls have pretty much realized their antler size potential by 6 or 7 years of age. And so, we stopped managing units for 8-year-old bulls because we figured most of them will reach that potential before they get to be 8 years old. So we harvest more bulls. There's still some old bulls. There's still some big bulls, but maybe not as many as there were when we were more conservative.
Yeah, Brad, the age objective is something that would have to be addressed in a different meeting. That's the elk plan, but I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, Dax, but I don't remember that the Manti changing age objectives it's been several years. So that wasn't one that got changed recently. So probably more of a permit issue than the age objective.
Manti stayed the same for quite a while. Yep. And we didn't change that 5.5 to 6 units, the units that were in that include the Manti. We didn't change those when we changed the plan last year. We only changed the older age class units.
Right. Any other questions? If not, we'll ask if there's any questions from the audience. If not, we'll get Chris to give us a online summary.
We had 5 people vote on this poll question or survey question. 0% strongly agreed, 20% somewhat agreed, 40% neither agreed or disagreed, and 20% somewhat disagreed, and 20% strongly disagreed. Some of the comments, they were against the bull increase on the Manti. There's another request to split the unit and require teeth submission. There's a request to convert the late archery hunt in December to a hams hunt to appeal to a larger group of hunters. Comment that said, don't increase permits, but increase costs for out-of-state hunters. And another comment said, the herd is in good shape, but the bulls are smaller. Be cautious so the age class stays higher.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Do we have a comment card? Kevin?
Kevin Norman, representing SFW. We support the division's recommendations with one exception, and that'd be on the San Juan. We're asking for no increase of permits there. The sentiment is, over the last 5 years, the harvest age has been trending down, with the exception of 2 years ago, it bumped up. And then with the new plan, we increased a bunch of permits last year, recommended another pretty good increase this year. So they're just wanting kind of wait one more year to see where it ends up. And that's our recommendation. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, we'll open it up for discussions from the RAC.
I just had a question, Dax, which is about the comment about requiring the teeth submission. Can you address that?
Yeah. So all the folks that get a limited entry elk tag, we send them a tooth packet and envelope and ask them to submit the teeth. We use that to, look at harvested age of bulls. We get a pretty good return rate. It's usually 80-90% of the hunters return the teeth. We've looked at this one and talked about it a lot. We feel like we're getting a pretty representative sample and that it works. There's some hesitation about going to mandatory, some worry that perhaps folks might be worried about the penalty and maybe send in the wrong teeth or something rather than be in violation of a rule. Yeah, that's one we talk about a lot. I think the division feels pretty comfortable with where we're at. Maybe some other folks don't, but that's kind of where we are.
I guess I always think the more data you can get, the better. So do you think if it was mandatory that you would get more and more data?
Probably get more. I don't know if it'll necessarily change the numbers much, but.
Just FYI, Sunshine, I'm pretty sure that last fall, the Wildlife Board made a motion to put that tooth return as an action item. So we should see that come back through the RACs this fall. It go through the public process.
So we might not recommend it, but but we could bring it back again.
Come on, Dax, you were all in favor of it last year.
I don't want to fight against having good data, but I also don't want to put folks in a position where they send us the wrong teeth because they're afraid of getting punished. So
They're doing that anyway.
maybe we're trading one kind of bad data for a different kind of bad data. I don't know.
So there's a lot of changes last year in elk, and it's exciting to hear you talk about it. Extra opportunities for folks. When we looked at that elk plan, when they came back with it, opportunity was a big part of that, and helping people get those tags, bringing age classes down, holding some at other areas. And I think it's exciting to see that people had the unlimited tags worked out. We had people that had an opportunity. The break in the season, the difference was 2% success rate, which I think is better than I expected. So I just want to say kudos to those that built that plan, and I think that's awesome.
Dax, I just thought of a question I should have asked earlier. With the shortened early rifle season, how did that affect our overall success rates as compared to before?
Yeah, great question. Interestingly, let me pull it up. I've got it in a slide here from that board work session meeting the other day. looked at success rate for the early rifle season. This is across the state for all of them combined. You know, in 2020, success rate was 77%, 2021 was 79%, 2022 was 80%, 2023, 79%. So right there, you know, 79, 80%, it didn't really change. The only one that looked like it maybe dropped a little bit was the late rifle. So that one had been kind of mid 70s, and 2023 it was 65%. But the archery stayed just about the same, muzzleloader stayed just about the same, early rifle, mid rifle. And that's lumping them all together. I think if we looked at them individually by age classes, it might be slightly different, but just big picture, the data that I just have right here easily available, that's what it turned out to be.
Great, thank you for that. Any other discussion?
I just want to echo some of the thoughts that have already been said. I'm very appreciative of the new elk plan. I think it's provided a lot of opportunity and kept us within our sideboards. And I know there's a lot of people that would disagree with that. And then this is only anecdotal evidence and way too small of a sample size to matter. But I did get the opportunity to participate on a couple of limited entry elk hunts this year where people got to draw, and they were on two different units. And when we got their ages back, one was a 6-year-old bull, one was a 9-year-old bull, and they both taped out at 320. So I mean, don't get me wrong. I think using average age of harvest is still a good management tool, but I think when we're talking about the size of elk and the big ones on the landscape, I don't know that age is everything. And I think there's plenty of study to show that the condition of the mother of that elk when that elk is being developed and the first year of its life has a lot more to do with how big of a bull you're going to get than how old it is. And so I'm grateful that we've made a shift to give people an opportunity at a pretty average size bull, which again, if you compare to a lot of Western states, even a 320 bull is pretty big in a lot of other Western states. And so that's our average around here. And I'm very glad with the plan and the way the division has been thoughtful about rolling out permits, not all in one big dump, but trying to break it up over the next couple of years as we implement this plan.
I kind of had a question. Can either Sportsmen's or Fish and Wildlife remind me what unit did you have the exception on? The San Juan. So we have a biologist here. Can people talk a little bit more about that? I was just kind of curious on.
Ian, could you help us out with that?
Somebody.
Yeah, so the San Juan had historically been managed for 7.5 to 8-year-old age class, and 2 years. All right, I'll start over. So the San Juan historically had been managed for a 7.5 to 8-year-old age class. We dropped that to 6.5 to 7 in the last round of the elk plan. Last year, we had an increase in tags to address that. Our age of harvest last year was 7.6. So our 3-year average is still 7.9. That being said, you know, with our new 6.5 to 7 age class, we're still quite a bit over that. So that's why we're recommending the increase in tags again this year. Any other questions?
Is that age class trending down?
It's been pretty consistent over the past couple of years. So I've got 2018 to 2023 in front of me. It was 8.8, 7.9, 8.1, 7.7, 8.3, and 7.6 over the past 5 years. So it's been in that, you know, it's ranged everywhere from 7.6 to 8.8 over the past 5 years, but we're still quite a bit over our age objective, even with our 3-year average.
Can you also talk a little bit about what other factors go into figuring out the number of tags? It can't just be age objective.
Yeah, so like Stax had said, you know, there's a lot that goes into our elk plan. So, you know, we do summer classification. So yeah, we're looking at our cow to to calf ratio. So we're taking into consideration that recruitment. And then, yeah, we're flying every 3 year for our bull. And we take into consideration that bull to cow ratio, but you know, that bull to cow ratio coming from flights is not necessarily as reliable, just because bulls tend to be separated away from the cow groups. They're tougher to find during our flights. But yeah, we take into consideration where we are at given our objective as well. So perfect. Thank you, guys.
Any other discussion? Thanks, Ian.
I guess I'm curious, what does the board think about Sportsman's for Fish and Wildlife recommendation?
I like to keep the permits on San Juan the way it's been recommended by the DWR. It gives more opportunity. We just heard that age class is within what the plan said. We just went back and forth on a different agenda item about staying within the plan. This is a new plan. I like how it's been put together. I think we stick the course with the plan and continue forward. At least that's my opinion.
I would agree with that. I know there's, you know, some of the locals down there felt like they wanted to see it reduced. You guys that live down there, you hearing any feedback? Not that the, you know, I mean, we're the public representative, but we also agree to go with the plan too. So I'm just curious what you're hearing.
I would say most of the feedback I get is this probably along with what SFW is recommending, that less tags. I mean, it's historically been a place where people go to kill huge bulls, you know, and a lot of people see that with the potential of going away. Whether that's really happening or not, who knows, but that's probably the sentiment that I hear the most.
Okay.
I don't know if that's different for you, Tyler.
Dax, that was one of the units that was an older age class. I know that some of those units, and I'm pretty sure San Juan was one of those units that had a very lopsided bull cow ratio at one time. Is that, do you know what the current bull cow ratio is? Ian, do you have that?
70 bulls per 100 cows. Yeah, so
Pretty high.
That's pretty
still.
high.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other discussion, or are we ready to make a motion?
I can make a motion to accept the division's recommendations for the elk permit as whatever, what's in the packet, as presented. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Dana and a second to accept the division's recommendations on the elk as presented. Any questions or discussion on the motion? If not, we'll call for a vote. All in favor? That passes unanimously.
Hey, Eric,
Second by Charles.
just as another piece of anecdotal, whatever. The biggest bull I've ever been a part of or know of down there was 7 years old.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 8, our antelope permit. Once again, Dax in the hot seat. Any clarifications before we open it up for questions?
Pretty straightforward. On limited entry buck antelope, we manage for an average age of harvested buck between 2 and 3. The data on size of horns and age, antelope are maybe a little bit of an exception to the rule, where they'll realize their potential. A lot of times Boone and Crockett antelope are only 2 or 3 years old, so we manage for towards a lower age class. On pronghorn, we've been doing that for several years now, and we just kind of keep incrementally recommending increases on most units year after year, and the ages seem to stay pretty high. So, and success rates are still pretty high. Most of our units are at or above the age objectives. The units that are above, on most of those, we're recommending increases with just a few exceptions. on a couple units that have had been really negatively impacted due to drought or the really hard winter that we had last year. So happy to jump into any specifics or talk to anything. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Dax. Open it up to questions from the RAC. No questions? Any questions from the audience? Tyler's got a question.
So last year, the San Rafael North was one of those units that was kind of struggling just because of the drought. What, is it looking better this last year? We getting better recruitment? I know it's one of the better units in the state.
And maybe we'll have Wade come up, and I hate to use the phrase turning the corner because last night I used that phrase and it got thrown back at me a lot, but I think that's a unit where long-term drought really took a toll, and things are looking better. I'm not going to use the phrase we're turning the corner, but we're not there yet. Is that fair, Wade? Desert, Centerfield Desert.
Yeah, what was the question on it?
How's it looking in third?
It could be a lot better. We're looking at doing a transplant. We were hoping to do that this winter from the Parker, and that capture didn't happen. But over the past decade, farm production has been way low, single digits.
Wait, is that the north or the south you're talking about?
The desert.
You're talking about south.
Yeah, south.
His question was more about the north.
Okay,
Sorry.
sorry about that. So on the north, so we flew that 2 years ago for our survey, and we were down about a third in numbers. And so last year we dropped permits down. In anticipation that our age objective would come down, but it didn't, so we raised them back up a little bit. It's still below what it was, though. Okay.
Yeah, sorry if we got the names confused. These San Rafael units, there's so many of them I get confused sometimes.
Okay, Chris, you want to give us the online summary?
3 people conducted the survey. 67% strongly agreed. 33% somewhat agreed with the recommendations. There was one comment. It said the increase in permits should go to archery and muzzleloader hunters and maybe hams hunters.
Okay, comment cards, Kevin?
Kevin Norman representing SFW. We support the division's recommendations. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, open it up to discussion from the RAC. No discussion, we'll entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion to accept the recommendations as presented.
Okay, do we have a second?
I can second.
Go ahead. I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the division's recommendations as presented by Sunshine, seconded by Dana. Any questions on the motion? All in favor? That passes unanimously. All right. Item number 9, antlerless permit recommendations. Dax, any clarifications before we open it up?
I think on this one, we can just jump right in. I guess the main thing I would say, this is antlerless hunts we use for a variety of purposes. If we're trying to manage numbers, like reduce herd numbers, this would be our primary tool we'd use to do that. And we do that with elk on units where we're trying to manage our elk populations to our target levels, our population objectives. The majority of our other antlerless hunts, especially deer and pronghorn, are really more targeted to dealing with specific conflicts or situations, whether it's animals in ag fields or hanging out within city limits, that type of thing. So disease was another one. So Yeah, and happy to answer any questions and dive into this one.
Okay, well, I'll start. I got a couple of questions. As I went down through the list, just looking, I see a few units where we're under objective and we still have tags. Book Cliffs is one of them. What, can you explain the logistics reasoning behind that?
Yeah, and Book Cliffs is one of those units where we really did see reduced herd productivity, low pregnancy rates, low calf to cow ratios, and some of it had to do with just a bunch of really old elk. And so initially, the cow hunts that we've had in the Book Cliffs, the ones that we've had for a really long time, were more focused on areas where we felt like there was potential for competition between elk and deer on critical deer winter ranges. So that's where a lot of those cow hunts kind of got started in the Book Cliffs, which has been below objective for a long time on elk. And then it's morphed a little bit now where some of it is, if we can harvest some more elk, potentially we can maybe rejuvenate that herd a little bit, remove some, if there's a lot of old animals available, hunters are going to take some of those older animals. Also, the Book Cliffs has had some pretty negative drought impacts. The last couple of years in the Book Cliffs have been a lot better, and we're excited about that. But so that's where those cow hunts initially came from. We've been below objective in the Book Cliffs for a long time, but initially they came from concern with high elk concentration either in the roadless area or on important deer winter ranges, and now it's morphed kind of into more of trying to remove some of those older animals to jumpstart that herd. And, yeah.
Okay, thanks. With that, do you see just by reducing those numbers, will they self-regenerate, so to speak, or is there been any thought for potentially supplementing that herd with some, maybe some of these units that are over objective? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, we're pretty nervous about moving animals these days. Just disease concerns have us pretty uncomfortable with a lot of movements. I do think, I'm jumping to deer on you just a little bit, but deer survival rates in the Book Cliffs the last couple of years have been super high. Adult doe survival's been in the mid to upper 90% range, which is, it had not been anywhere near that for probably the last 10 years in the Book Cliffs. So I think I'm looking at that as an indicator that the habitat conditions are improving. The weather patterns and moisture in the Book Cliffs has been a lot better. There's still some issues, but it's better than it has been in a while. And we're seeing that translated in deer survival. And the same thing is going to also have a positive impact on elk. So I'm optimistic, keep your fingers crossed that we still get some of that monsoon moisture and good winter moisture in the Book Cliffs. But as we get the moisture, the habitat, we've done a lot of habitat work out there with partners, and hopefully maybe that unit can continue to improve, and we can see these elk populations have been down, and then we reduced them a little more with some antlerless harvest. Hopefully that unlocks that a little bit, and we'll see some growth.
Okay, thanks.
I talked about the Book Cliffs last time we did antlerless recommendations pretty in depth about studies done by the BLM and by the DWR on aspen regeneration and how it's not really working in the Book Cliffs. And I talked about how I'd like to see that target number be reevaluated, and those might be my opinions. But I know the Book Cliffs pretty well. They're still struggling. You're right. They're getting some more rain, but the difficulty in doing habitat work in the Book Cliffs is really high. It's steep ground, lots of oil and gas strung around all over the place, which makes it difficult to do traditional things like prescribed burning, mastication, that kind of thing. So I'm glad to see that there are some antlerless tags, especially as you guys come here and talk about the 20-year-old cow elk that are out on the ground. So I guess my question is that something you guys have considered, is relooking at that number? I mean, 9,000 elk on the Book Cliffs. you go north of the divide, you're going to have better habitat up there. But this side of the Divide Ridge Road that's really difficult to see many elk at all down here.
Yeah, I think is it 7,500, the objective there? I can look, but, we had
Yeah, 7,500 is the objective.
Yeah, we had a working group that looked at the book cliffs that was based out of the Vernal office, out of the Northeastern. And they did a pretty, we had Brett Prevedel, he's retired from NRCS, and he was the RAC chair in Northeastern region for a while. Did a pretty in-depth forage analysis. And under the best of circumstances, when we have good wet years, we had just an adequate amount of forage for all the mouths on the landscape, whether it's horses, bison, elk, livestock, everything. And we hadn't had good years very often in the book cliff. So we had more mouths than we had feed. And I think that's when we probably need to look at the elk objective on that unit and see if it needs to be adjusted, or maybe even have a range on it, like some of the units do in southern Utah, where depending on conditions, it fluctuates a little bit. I think it's probably one we need to look at. So Joe, get on it. Fair questions, good questions. It's probably one we need to look at.
We just need to get the horses under control. Then we have less mouths to feed.
And I think that's a big part of, there's some complications. It's an amazing place. It's an amazing unit, and it's got some tricky parts to it with
it does.
Jurisdiction. There's a lot of tribal ground. The horse issues are complicated.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's 7,500 is where it should be, but I hate to see when we're under objective and we know that the horse population is well over objective, why we need to be cutting our objective. I struggle with that. And I know I speak for a lot of other folks, so.
Hey, Dax, to bring it away from the book list for a little bit, if I can do that. The CWD tags in the Mighton area. I guess I have a few questions about CWD. When you bring up CPW's studies on CWD, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, their Unit 60, which is just adjacent to the LaSalle's over there in the Paradox area, they're saying has over 20% CWD within the herd. What I know that we have some collars on some deer in Moab, where I've been told that some of that is to track some CWD, see if there's deer dying in that herd. What's the number that the DWR predicts in our herd? I know we share the herd with Colorado basically over there, so it's kind of hard to see their numbers and then see us giving tags to that area in Mighton when we might have as high or higher populations of CWD. And then I guess another question to that is, what is the division's response to CWD? Is it something that we're going to try and actively manage? I mean, it looks like we are in Mighton, but we don't seem to be doing it on LaSalle's or in Moab.
Yeah, great questions. And I wish Dr. Stout, our veterinarian, was here tonight. She gave an update at that board work session. If you have a minute, that might be good to watch her update in here. And CWD continues to be a really challenging issue to deal with. And I wish there was a silver bullet for it and we knew exactly what to do. We're trying some things. These hunts in the Mighton area, targeted to areas with higher prevalence, are something new. We've only been doing them, I think this will be the third year now. And we're trying to see if we can reduce densities with some of the antlerless permits, as well as target some of those older age class bucks with that limited entry, November rut hunt, where older age class bucks are the most likely to have and spread the disease. We met this last year, we met with CPW as they were redoing their management plans and deciding on buck to doe ratios for, that unit that's there is at 60 right across from LaSalle's. And they it was a really good meeting, and I was glad we could get together. We met in Monticello and spoke with them. And after that meeting, they actually reduced their target buck-to-doe ratio they were going to manage to on that unit after getting some input from us and talking about CWD. That is one of the things in the science that the data does indicate. If you manage for a lower buck-to-doe ratio, you are that can reduce the prevalence and likelihood of spread and increase in prevalence and spread. And there's some theories. I was part of a group several years back that sat down and looked at some huge data sets from a lot of states across the West, and we saw CWD prevalence had increased really rapidly in parts of Colorado and Wyoming, whereas it hadn't in Utah. And based on the analysis, it looked like the fact that we managed for a little bit lower buck-to-doe ratio on our general season units probably contributed to a slower increase in prevalence in Utah, although it does seem to still be increasing and spreading. So I think, with regard to Moab, deer around Moab and what's happening on the LaSalle's, it's something we're aware of. There's a reason the LaSalle's is a 15 to 17 unit as far as buck-to-doe ratio for general season. It's probably best management practice to manage CWD positive units towards a lower buck-to-doe ratio. What we're doing on that Mighton unit has been tricky. It's almost entirely private land, and a lot of the landowners are actually not really excited about letting a bunch of people on their property to kill the deer in order to protect the deer. I've heard them say the cure is worse than the disease. We got to kill all the deer so this disease doesn't kill all the deer. And I understand where they're coming from. CWD is kind of a tough one and frustrating. I don't know that we have all the answers, but we're trying some things, and we've started at a pretty small scale to see what we can do there. I don't know if anyone from the region wants to add anything additional about LaSalle's or Moab area or anything, but does that answer your question? I just gave a really long rambling answer. I'm famous for those.
Kind of. I really just want to know what the DWR, is it going to actively try and manage for CWD, or is it just going to say, it is what it is, and we're going to continue forward? I know that Colorado Unit 60 is a mandatory testing unit. I know that we haven't had mandatory testing units. We probably don't know what the prevalence of CWD in our herd on LaSalle's or most units, because we don't have mandatory testing. That might not be something that we need. It might be something that you guys aren't considering, something to really look into. I mean, it might be something for you to bring up in the deer management plan, but I want to know how we're going to move forward with CWD, and then also if we have any resources on the LaSalle's, what that looks like right now, so we can kind of determine how that unit's going to look in the future.
I'll respond to some of your bigger, more general questions, but maybe if there's anything, Dustin, you want to add with regard to local stuff in the region.
Yeah, you mentioned the Moab collars that we put out. It was just a small study we did last year. It was mostly to see, we targeted on winter deer inside the town and to see if they were spreading onto the mountain at all, because it is a hotspot for CWD inside Moab. So we put 16 collars out. Out of the, I think we've had 8 die altogether. 4 of those we've been able to test. Only one of those came back positive, but we've had others that weren't collared. We've had quite a few come back positive, but none of those that we've collared within the town have moved up on to the mountain at all. So kind of localized.
Okay, so 25% positivity rate so far on the ones that you had collared in town.
Yeah,
Okay.
on the mountain, I think we're at 17% on what we've tested through check stations. And
Okay, that's the highest number I've heard so far. I think it was a year or 2 ago on the website. My wife shot a CWD positive deer, and it was saying like 2%. And that's when I started really going down this rabbit hole of what's Colorado got, what do we have, what's going on here.
We're definitely higher than 2.
It seems to be kind of spotty. We have, calling them hot spots. To answer kind of some of your bigger picture, longer term questions, we have a CWD management plan. It's an appendix to the statewide deer plan, which we're revising right now. Actually been talking with our veterinarian about, hey, let's look at this. What do we need to update here? What can we change? What can we do better? I think it was last fall or the fall before, I took through a rule change and added some language that enables us to do mandatory testing for CWD so that we have that available as a tool. I don't right this minute have a plan to implement that, but I think that's something that we could see in the revised statewide deer plan and that CWD management plan appendix that's part of the statewide deer plan. But I don't know if we've made it for sure decision on where we're going with that, but it's something that we have considered, we have looked at, and we made sure that we had the statutory framework in place to be able to implement it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I guess I'm not saying that that's something that we have to do. It's just about where we want to go as a state with CWD. Other states have done different things. Some people have taken a hard hand on it. Some people have not, or some states have not. And at this point, it looks like we're kind of dabbling in hard hands in some areas like Mighton. This is how we manage our deer herds. This is how we manage our elk herds, is through the antlerless hunts. If we need to manage a herd because we're going to try and manage CWD, this is where we need to start doing it. So finding out those answers, one, I think the big question to find out for us is how we want to handle CWD. Do we want to attack it aggressively, or do we want to just sit back and see how it affects us?
And one of the complicating factors there in that Mighton area is it's 98% private land, and some of the landowners are on board, a lot of them are not. And so it's not as simple as just the DWR is going to do this, and we'll tell you, the heavy-handed government is going to make you, remove all the deer from your land. And so it can be tricky to navigate. I think we still have a lot to learn, and we want to try, we're anti-CWD. We want to reduce that disease as much as possible. And it's a complicated issue.
Okay, any other questions?
I had a question. This kind of stems from the public comment about disallowing the take of a cow moose with a calf at their side. And I guess I was just wondering kind of what our pregnancy rates are, or what concerns there might be with that.
I'll pass moose off to Rusty.
I don't know if I've got real specific numbers for you, but cow moose they have twins a lot. I don't know at what rate, but they have twins quite frequently. Our pregnancy rates are high. It probably depends on the unit, what the recruitment looks like from year to year, and what the climatic variables are, and things like that. I believe the concerns brought up by some of the other RACs were just the idea of having a permit for a cow moose and harvesting a cow that also had a calf, and then potentially reducing the likelihood of that calf surviving. So I don't know if it was a question of whether or not we were harvesting more cows than we should, given the reproduction rates, then it was just like, hey, let's kill one moose, not two. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
So I guess, hold on, Rusty, I'd have you wait, because I am a little curious on this particular point, and maybe you don't have an answer, but would it be appropriate to address this issue right now, or wait till we get to the big game rules to talk about this?
So I think changes to the big game rule is an appropriate place to do it. If you want to add it in as an official rule change, we could take a look at that. After that Central Region RAC, we're committed to at least getting some information out to cow moose hunters, and we can do that fairly quickly. We can address it in our guidebooks, and we could also send letters. It's 12 permit holders, so we could send letters to those hunters and just say, hey, we strongly encourage you not to harvest a cow moose with a calf at heel, and hopefully that, if there is a problem with that, hopefully that gets people thinking about it.
Any other questions? Any questions from the audience? Do you have an online summary?
We had 3 people answer this survey question. 33% strongly agreed, 33% neither agreed or disagreed, and 33% somewhat disagreed. We had 1 comment. We had a few comments actually. Doe, deer, and pronghorn should not be harvested anywhere in the state. The idea was they should be transplanted. They'd also like to see success have a quota system so the herds are not over harvested.
Okay, Kevin's shaking his head no, so we'll open it up for discussion from the RAC.
So one quick question, we've kind of talked about why they don't transport or transplant a lot of does because of the CWD and other issues. Do we have those same problems transplanting antelope?
Not nearly to the extent we do with deer. And so, knock on wood, we're a lot more comfortable moving pronghorn.
So has it just become like a cost thing? It's too expensive, it's easier to hunt them? Or what's the biggest driver for not just transplanting those doe antelope?
So doing a capture and transplant project's pretty expensive. We don't harvest a ton of doe pronghorn. And if you look at it, where we do, it's usually, a few here, a few there in pretty small specific areas. I know 2 years ago, Northeastern region caught and sent, I think it was 70 or so pronghorn to Arizona. They were really needing some. And we actually were going to try to do a transplant project off Parker Mountain last year, but this winter that we're just coming out of, and we just never had the snow conditions to where we had the animals bunched up near the traps to where we could do it. We are probably looking at doing at least a small transplant off Parker Mountain this next winter. So, we're open to moving pronghorn, but also there maybe needs to be enough of them to make it worth putting in the effort and doing it too. So sometimes if it's just, can we harvest 10 or 15 or 20 pronghorn in an area, that maybe makes more sense than putting together an entire capture project and trying to move them.
Any other discussion? Cash?
Yeah, I think we took some time to talk about the book cliffs there in our question part. And something that I would hope to see going forward statewide is that, that we can have, as hunters, as conservationists, we can have less arguments about how many buck tags we're issuing this year, or what's the average age of the bulls, or where have all the best bulls gone, then we can start having more conversations about habitat and winter range and access to it. I just agree with the sentiments that if we want to hunt more, then we got to grow the herds within the management plans we have. I know our elk herds about where we want it, but I think we spend so much time talking about how big of is the elk or how many bucks did we harvest this year, and too little time talking about habitat and how that might be able to improve the hunting experience for everyone.
I totally agree with you. Cache habitat is the key. I don't want to forget summer habitat, and that is summer habitat leads to those big bodied animals that go into winter. They're starting to look like that's more important than even the winter habitat that we've been focusing so hard on for so many years. But we got issues on certain units where habitat projects are difficult, and that's why I brought that up. Is I just actually spent today all day in the book cliffs looking at different habitat options, and it's a difficult place to be. So.
And I guess I just feel like biologically, where we can have the greatest impact on our species is through our antlerless, because they're the ones that are reproducing. Dan and I, they're the ones that are the most important ones. So.
Anybody want to touch that one? If there's no more discussion, we would be open for motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the Antlerless permit recommendations as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Charles to accept the division's recommendations as presented, seconded by Cash. Any questions or discussion on the motion? All in favor? That passes unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to the shed antler gathering recommendations. Rusty, you want to clarify anything before we open it up to questions, or you good to go?
Sure, I'd be happy to clarify some things. This presentation, I apologize if it was a little scattered. There was a lot to try to cram in here. Hopefully it was easy to follow. But this is, you know, kind of the results of the shed committee that we formed last year, what they recommended to the division, and then what of those things had to go through a legislative process, what actually ended up and didn't end up in the legislation, and then based on that, what the division is officially recommending to the Wildlife Board, and then the associated rule changes that go along with that. And then there's kind of a smattering of miscellaneous changes to address also in that same big game rule. And some of those are law enforcement type changes. And so if there's questions about those, I may invite up Lieutenant Abbott to help me with those. But most of the questions I've gotten and comments about the shed antler recommendations, it seems like it has to do with the seasons, either the non-resident season or the lack of a resident season. And so if I could just explain kind of the logic of the committee and why the committee landed where they did. With regards to the non-resident season, the start date of May 1st, the committee felt like with most of the surrounding states already having a May 1st shed season date, that if we opened it earlier than that to non-residents, then we could potentially get inundated with not, you know, people from out of state, all these different states who can't shed hunt in their backyard, but they want someplace to go. And so that was the main reason that recommendation was made. And then with regards to not requiring a season for residents, one of the main sentiments was that there's lots of other recreators on the landscape during that same time frame. There's turkey hunters, there's coyote hunters, there's hikers, bikers, skiers, you know, all kinds of people that are out using the landscape. And they didn't want to, they felt that a season would single out and kind of punish shed hunters disproportionately than any other recreators on landscape. We also looked at collar data from 1,000 mule deer across the state, and we couldn't detect a significant difference in distance moved per day during the shed antler closure this year versus when the closure was lifted. And so at least at that scale, it didn't look like it was affecting. And we all know that when we shed out, we, you know, potentially bump deer and they may, you know, they may get displaced temporarily. And so we're conscious of that, and we don't want that. That's why we kind of we still have the emergency closure in place if deer are really nutritionally stressed. But at the statewide scale, we couldn't tell that it was making mule deer move more than they normally would. And so that was the other reason that, you know, we don't know if shed hunting, we know it has the potential to, but is it really affecting survival at a, you know, a big scale? Also, the sentiment of the committee was that during the closure, you know, potentially if we had a season, what a lot of shed hunters saw during the closure was that it maybe added pressure in some areas, where instead of somebody just going shed hunting and picking up their sheds and going home, they were going up once, twice, 3 times, you know, and not shed hunting, but locating sheds. And then on opening day, they were going up and packing them out. And so they felt like, you know, having a season could potentially add some pressure to the habitat and the landscape. So those are some of the reasons and the sentiment of the committee, and I guess why we're recommending what we are. So sorry if that was long-winded, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Okay, thanks, Rusty.
Yeah.
Maybe what you said kind of takes away from the question that I had. I wondered why the legislature exempted private landowners from this. To me, it felt like that undermined the division's reasoning of harassing big game. And what you just said, maybe it doesn't make a big difference, but to me, it basically, what they said was it's okay to harass big game on private land, but can't do it on public land. Do you know what the reasoning for that was? Is it strictly to get their vote? We know that's how the legislator works. Let's cut to the chase.
Yeah.
We know how they work.
I'm not gonna try to speculate on legislation, but yeah, and that's something that I think maybe is lost in this, that maybe people don't realize that in that legislation, they granted the Wildlife Board the authority to set a season if they would like to. However, it wouldn't apply to private landowners and their guests. And so if a resident season is created, it would only apply on public land. And so just so everyone understands that component of it.
Okay, anybody else have questions?
I guess I have a couple questions. And maybe I'd start first with the comment, and I do appreciate the committees and all this work that's gone into it. But I heard that general story of, well, maybe during the closure, we had some added pressure because people were out hiking and focusing on looking at sheds, but not picking them up. I would think out-of-state people could do the same, right? So I guess I'm still unclear about why having two separate seasons, one for out-of-state and one for residents, from a threshold, like for affecting
Yeah,
the
and that's a great point. And I also think that non-residents may be less likely to make the drive, unless they're right by the border or something, which is real potential, but probably not willing to make those long drives multiple times as well. And another thing that the legislative component of this added was some real teeth in the law enforcement part of it. So it assigned a restitution value for sheds, and there's the potential to lose big game hunting privileges if you get caught violating shed rules. And so it helps with that part of it as well. Yeah, that if somebody is trying to be sneaky and they get caught, then there's more teeth in it. But that's a really great point. You're right.
I got a question on that restitution value. I've hunted sheds for a long time, sold sheds. I know that I haven't really seen them above $15 a pound for brown sheds, so I'm assuming that's why you came up with the 30. Is that number, is that set in statute that it's at that $30, or 20 years down the road, if something explodes and those go through the roof, are you able to adjust that number if needed?
Yeah, I mean, we could always adjust that number, ask a legislator to adjust that number in code. And Lieutenant Abbott can correct me if I'm wrong, but the $30 a pound isn't necessarily to reflect the going rate of shed antlers. It's to give law enforcement, a clear path on how to prosecute these things and have some teeth in it, but maybe not make somebody a felon for a couple sheds, so it's finding a balance there. And, it could stand the test of time as shed antler prices do increase. So is that accurate? Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess I have some more questions. I am still going back to trying to understand the reason to have a resident and a non-resident season. Because what I kind of heard was, well, if the surrounding states restrict shed hunting to May, that Utah would get overrun. It sounds to me like we're concerned about people. The elk, they don't, or the deer, they don't mind if we're Utah or Colorado. So is this more of a social thing that Utah people want less people in the field?
I think there's absolutely a social component to it, yes, that you know, people that have been shed hunting for decades, if you talk to some of those people, they will cite, you know, there was the good old days of shed hunting where you were the only person on the mountain, and now it's a very popular activity, and it does, you know, lessen the experience. And so, yes, there is a social component to it, 100%.
I can speak a little bit to it, living on the border here, shed hunting, being in the Triangle or up in the South Book Cliffs areas where there's known wintering deer herds. Colorado has that May 1st, and you'll go over there and it'll be a lot of Colorado plates and a lot of folks that are here before their season starts to move over, because it's not hard to come to from Grand Junction to some of those areas. So it might not affect people close in, like in the center of the state, but on the edge, it's definitely a big deal for folks that enjoy that.
And I will add that some of our, the people on the committee, the land management agency personnel, and I don't remember the specific areas, but they cited specific areas close to state lines that they felt like there was habitat degradation, and that if we limited the non-residents coming over, that would help some of those situations. So that was another reason.
Tyler?
I'm moving on from shed antlers. So included in this is night vision stuff and changing the verbiage from using to possession. I'll have to have the law enforcement guy, individual, come up and answer my questions. So definition of possession in this, I guess you'd call it a rule, right?
Yeah, so you're asking for the definition of
Correct.
possession. I guess it'd be like about anything else that's in your possession. If you have it on you or with you at any point, at some point you got to have it in your possession, right? So yeah, if it's with you or on you, it's in your possession.
And do you have to be hunting, have a tag, just be out in an area where there are big game?
So it says that you can't use it to take, locate, or attempt to locate big game.
So hypothetical, right?
Okay.
So here we are. I'm done hunting for the year. So I'm trapping or chasing coyotes all night. Coming home, there's a deer, a big buck. Can I stop and look at it with my binoculars if I have my thermal on my back seat?
Are you using it to locate, take, or attempt to locate?
No.
Yeah, so you'd probably be okay. Yeah, so it reads you can't use it within that definition.
So, yeah, so if I had it out the window looking at a big game animal.
That's different.
No.
You're
Okay.
using it to locate.
Correct.
Yeah.
So then, but my concern is the possession. Are we going to penalize those individuals who love deer or big game just as much as they love hunting predators during the night, and punish them and not let them be able to look at the critters on the way home, you know, on typically the winter range. So you're looking at big bucks and maybe big elk, but you know, that was my concern.
Okay, just that they'll be using it just to look at them as they're out.
Just being able to look at them with your binoculars, even though you're in possession during that time period of a night vision device.
Yeah, and that's not really what this was written for, the intent of it, but I can get that.
Isn't this more geared toward during hunting season? I mean, if I understand what you're saying, if you're in winter range, the hunts are over, you're out just viewing wildlife.
I mean,
isn't this geared more towards during hunting season? If you're out, if there's a cow hunt going on, or if there's a hunt going on and you have that in possession, then chances are you're going to get busted.
I'm sorry to add to the conversation. Didn't we put a season date
Yeah,
on
there's
the
dates on
rule?
it. That's
Yeah,
just what we were talking.
yeah,
I want to
okay.
say it's the end of July to the 1st of January or end of
Yeah,
December.
end of
July
December,
to
yeah.
end of December.
So there
Yeah,
wasn't-
so there, it
But
is their
I'm rolling
timeframe.
November, December.
So.
If there's a hunt going on and you have it in your possession, you're probably breaking the law.
I really see this being up to the discretion of the officer, and I think they're
Yeah.
gonna make the right call. Honestly, I
With-
don't think you're gonna get in trouble for, but that's my opinion, I guess.
So yeah, I'll leave my comment for later.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, I got a question. So this is for the management buck and cactus buck check-in. That's my question on that. And I'm just wondering, I'm not saying that maybe this isn't a good plan, but my question is what is the division's confidence level that this is not going to be an issue? I feel like we're dropping it. We're dropping check-ins with no substitution, right? And maybe a substitution in the future, but it sounds to me like we don't have a substitution right now. So what's our concern level?
So yeah, we're moving to mandatory reporting. We think we'll have that all set up, probably not this hunting season, but next. And so, worst case scenario, there's a 1-year gap. And, talking to law enforcement, they can still enforce this. They can, relatively speaking, it's not a lot of permits. And they can spot check, they're finding a lot of them in the field as is. And so, a lot of the enforcement is still reliant upon, people, observing something happen and reporting people. And so they felt confident that they could still enforce this even with not having everything totally lined up with mandatory reporting and photo evidence and all that kind of stuff. That's fair.
Any other questions from the RAC? Any questions from the audience? We have any online comments?
We do. We had 6 people answer this question. 17% strongly agree, 33% somewhat agree, 17% somewhat disagree, and 33% strongly disagree. Was a comment, a few comments. They do not support the non-resident restrictions. If there is a non-resident restriction, they should allow people who were once residents to gather sheds similar to Montana's Come Home and Hunt program. Another person supports the season, but doesn't support needing to have a permit. Another person does not support shed regulations, but does support restrictions on out-of-staters. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Kevin, we'll go to public comment.
Kevin, representing SFW, we support the division's recommendation on this item. Thanks.
Okay, open it up for discussion from the RAC. I'll get to you, Darren.
Sorry. I like seeing this. I shed hunted in this state before I ever actually hunted in this state. I've spent a lot of time earlier in my life on the mountain looking for sheds, and something needed to change here. I like what the recommendations were made. Kind of balances both ways. I just talked about the living on the edge of the state and how that affects some of this. Anytime you put a value on a bit of wildlife, like we've seen it in the past, where it can really affect how that wildlife is managed and how it can be, like, the fact that shed antlers are something you can make money off of. If we don't manage this somehow, we could detrimentally affect that winter ground that they live on. And I'm glad that we accepted that some things need to change, and we're moving towards something I think is good. So that's my opinion, rambling opinion, I guess.
Any other comments? Tyler?
In regards to the shed hunting, we get hit pretty good with the Colorado individuals. They'll come down and hit our, general and limited entry sides. I don't shed hunt much, so it doesn't bother me, but I have a lot of friends who do, and I don't know that I necessarily support a season. I know there was one comment, an individual from Colorado that hunted the Dolores Triangle. They're deer in the summer, and they just winter on our side. And so, a buck, he may follow. Also, maybe it spends time on his property in the summer, and then he tracks it down and wants to pick up its horns. So just one of my thoughts. Night vision stuff, I think you'll keep the honest people honest, and I think the other people will, those who are going to cheat are going to cheat still. Some of those binoculars are pretty small. They'll slip right into a backpack. If they're going to use it, they're still going to use it. But I think the people who will suffer are the people who are the honest individuals. And I don't like making a law or not making a law because we're worried about other people going to break it, like that maybe the shed season. Like I would hope people have integrity, but unfortunately that's the case. But now we have some, hopefully we'll have some teeth to come down on these individuals when they are finally caught, if they're not following the rules. And so the possession thing, just my case in point, it's going to depend on the CO I come across. If I pull over and look at a deer, because technically I'm locating, looking through my binoculars, if I had some sort of night vision device on my back seat in my truck. So that's my concerns.
Okay, Darren.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I was on the shed hunting committee and just wanted to say it was a good, diverse group. We had lengthy discussion over multiple meetings about resident versus non-resident, season date versus non-season date, cost, all those kind of things. And anyways, just wanted to throw that out there. We had those discussions, but the group met on what's being recommended, and yeah, it was a good experience for me, and just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Darren. I have a comment, and it's kind of geared to what Tyler was talking about, but I actually really like the change to the possession rather than just because before it put 100% of the responsibility on the CO to determine the intent. This helps them take that out. Yes, there's still going to be some judgment in a case like you're talking about, but I think that changing this changes that, minimizes that greatly over what it was before. That's just my thoughts on that one.
I agree. It was still being abused, I believe, because people are spread out across the landscape, and if you're up in the trees, you can do what you're going to do. So
yeah, unfortunately, you can teach ethics, you can preach ethics, but you can't enforce ethics. So Cash, did you have something?
Yeah, I just had a couple comments on some of the things we're talking about here. Going back to one of the questions that were asked and the private land exceptions to antlerless, to the shed hunting pickup. This is obviously coming from a guy that doesn't have any private land, any of my comments here, but I am always deeply disturbed by our willingness from the division, from wildlife board, RAC, the legislature to just hand out private land exceptions left and right. So that if I'm a sportsman on public land, I have to abide by one set of rules, but those set of rules do not apply to people on private land. And when it's a state resource that we're talking about that's owned by the public, that's really hard for me to swallow. And we see it here with this, we see it with trail cameras. Just this last fall, we handed out a bunch more opportunities for private landowners to apply for their own hunts, stuff that the rest of us do not have access to. And that's really hard. And I know we can't do anything about that in this body because it's in statute that private lands are exception to it. But I still think it's worth voicing. I'm very disturbed by the trend of willingness of conservationists and sportsmen as a whole to not object to that at least a little bit. So some other things, I do hope that the photo authentication of what you've harvested, that does come forward maybe faster than what I've heard at other times. If we're gonna no longer have check-ins for tags that are very specific to what you can or can't harvest, and on premium units, right? Limited entry tags, I hope that we can roll that forward a little quicker. And then the other thing I just wanted to voice is that I appreciated the email that was sent out about the calf at heel for our antlerless moose hunts. I do realize that we were talking about a very small number of tags. Having said that, a lot of these tags are issued on units that are currently struggling with their moose populations. So I think there is a lot of validity to at least considering what was proposed in that email about passing a rule, or at least suggesting, which is all we can do, suggest the rule be written that talks about not harvesting a cow that has that year's calf at hill. And just to help, we just talked about our hesitancy to add 3 or 1 once in a lifetime permits. If we're gonna have those kind of conversations for antlered animals, I certainly think there should be a similar conversation for antlerless animals that fall into the once in a lifetime category.
Scoot, you have something?
I listened to that Central Region RAC and listened to the young lady that came up and presented that and heard the chair's comments regarding that. And I think it's a good thing, definitely to promote the education, to say, hey, we recommend that you try to not shoot just get that education out there so people know that that would be the preference if they do not harvest a cow with a calf.
I guess to bring it back to agenda item 10, I did have a question that I didn't ask, but I was hoping maybe you guys could answer. The commercial antler buyer registration, what does that entail? What does that cost, if there is a cost associated with it?
Yeah, so with this, we would define what a commercial antler buyer is in the big game rule. And basically, it's an individual or an entity that purchases antlers for the purpose of reselling for profit, basically for financial gain. It doesn't apply. There's been some confusion about people that collect shed antlers and then sell them. That's fine. There's no commercial regulations with that. This would just be for the people that are purchasing antlers and then reselling them for profits. And the fee is our standard COR fee, which is $150. And that would apply to residents as well as non-residents. And that goes along with kind of the fair trade, constitutional, interstate business stuff. So we can't really, that's something we couldn't charge non-residents more than we charge non-residents for something like that.
Okay, yeah, that brings an additional question is what does that $150 go to? And then, as you know, antler buyers are it's kind of a gypsy lifestyle where you drive around from state to state.
Right.
How are we gonna enforce that? Are you gonna have your lieutenants just kind of try and show up as these guys show up with their trailers, or how do we get that out to these buyers that they need to purchase that?
You're welcome to take it if you'd like, Lieutenant. I think, you know, if something fishy's going on, you tend to hear about it, and then you can start looking into those individuals, but I'll let him speak to it.
That's a good question. I think that's something moving forward, we'll discuss on how we want to deal with some of those, because you do kind of see them all over the place. They'll park on the side of the road or at a vacant lot somewhere in the town and start buying. And those are people we can have conversations with and kind of find out what their intent is and move forward with some of that. Usually when they've got the big trailer and they're buying everything they can, it's pretty straightforward that they've got a reason behind it, so we can look into some of that.
Okay, yeah, great. And then do other states do this? Just, I don't know if this is something, like if I'm coming from New Mexico, let's say I'm an antler buyer, I'm not gonna probably know that this is a thing. So how are we gonna educate these folks, I guess?
Good question. I'm sure we could do some outreach or something as far as getting it out there to the people.
After they get a ticket, they'll learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, we know who a lot of these people are, and a lot of them are, 100% legitimate business people. It's also a small community, and I think word can spread pretty quickly among antler buyers. And part of the purpose behind this was, if there is bad apples, this puts something in place that you can then take away if they're, being bad actors. And so, you could take away that COR, and then they wouldn't be allowed to do that anymore.
Okay, and then again, the money from the COR, have we figured out where that's gonna go? Is that gonna go towards winter grounds?
I'm going to defer to Lindy on that one if she has a good answer.
Trying, there we go. Sorry, it was lagging for a second. So this would go back into our restricted fund account, and then we would use it for projects within the Division of Wildlife.
Okay, so like a general fund?
Yes, our restricted fund that we use for habitat projects, for staffing, for, like we just use it as our restricted funds, but we can, for our money resources.
Okay, yeah, it's great to know that it's going back to the DWR and not just to the Treasury, the general.
Yep, no, it's going back to us.
Yeah.
I think that will somewhat self-regulate. Like you said, it's a pretty close community, and if other buyers understand that there's somebody out there that's doing stuff that's going to affect their business, they'll bring it up to someone's attention. So
I guess I had a question. I know that there's commercial buyers of antlers, but are there companies that are commercial shed gatherers?
Probably in a sense. I mean, a lot of people collect antlers and then sell them. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of money in it, but it's not like something that could sustain a family. It's something that, if you really put some work in, you might be able to sell them for, a couple $1,000s at the end of the season or something like that, which is a lot better than me. I don't even get close to that. So, yeah.
It's probably kind of closely related to trapping nowadays, where you might make enough money to make your fuel back. So it's really the buyers and then the middlemen above the buyers that make the most money, that ship them off overseas and sell the good ones for whatever crafts or dog chews or whatever they want.
And if you have something like specific, because I think I know a lot of people who have a business for antler, shed antlers. They go out, I mean, they're going to have to pay for the permit now, right? That's
only if you're buying them and then reselling them. Yeah. But if you're just collecting them and selling them, you wouldn't.
There's
need
no
any
permit. Okay. I misunderstood that, but yeah, there's a lot of people that have that so-called business. They do it as whatever, whether it's tax write-off or they make money. But I think for my from what I understood, that I'm much more concerned about the buyers than the gatherers. Any other comments? Okay. Open it up for a motion.
Do you guys think there's two motions here? It seems to be we're talking about two separate things. We're talking about antlers and we're talking about night vision stuff.
Yeah, we can split it up if you want to go that route. That's not a problem.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to accept the shed antler gathering recommendations made by the division.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the shed antler portion of this item as presented, seconded by Sunshine. Any questions or discussion on the motion?
That includes the non-resident season, is that correct?
Yeah, for
Okay. Call a vote. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And opposed? Okay, the motion passes 6-2. Tyler, first, you want to give us a reason why you were opposed to that?
I think my reason is based on the one comment that we got. Pretty unique situation, but you know, where we do share deer with another state, I mean, it's not just our resource.
So you're opposed to the non-resident season?
Correct.
And is that your same reasoning?
Yes, I appreciate that we need to manage the shed hunting, but I hesitate because I don't think the benefit of having restricting out of state is shown. I don't see it solving the resource problem of resource degradation on the landscape. And the comment of these deer, if the concern is on the state borders, those deer cross state borders. So that's where I was hesitant, is I just don't, the benefit wasn't shown, and from a management perspective, I think it's challenging.
So I'm trying to summarize this, but basically you don't see the benefit to the resource. Is that in a nutshell?
The intent I hear for managing the shed gathering is to help reduce resource damage and help reduce negative effects on the wildlife population. And restricting the out of state, it wasn't shown to me that helped either one of those issues.
All right, thank you. Okay, we will move to the next agenda item.
We have to deal with the.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
night
thank
vision.
you. Does someone like to make a motion on the remainder of that, or particularly to the night vision portion?
do we need any more discussion?
So there were a lot of things in here, and we just did the shed antlers, right?
Yeah, so there's the big game rule amendment
There's a lot
portion.
of other stuff in here.
And we should go through that.
Individually or as a whole, because
Is there something specifically you want to discuss?
No, I discussed what I wanted to discuss. Everything else I think I'm okay with, so.
I think we can make a motion on night vision, and then you can make a motion on everything else.
So I'll make a motion that we approve everything but the night vision at this point, as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Tyler to approve the remainder of this item with the exception of the night vision as presented, seconded by Cash. Any questions on that motion?
Yeah, I have a question. I want to make sure we're still going to have a vote on the night vision. All right? Am I right in that or no?
Yes, we'll have to.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
We'll
As
have
long,
to.
as long as we're still going to have a vote on it. Okay.
Darren?
Okay, I'm confused.
So yeah, let me just ask on that. You just don't like the current wording, unlawful to possess?
Yeah, that's the next motion. This one's just, so this motion is just to accept everything else besides the night motion.
Yeah, like
Or the night
unimproved
vision.
airstrips.
Okay, yep.
Yeah.
Bighorn sheep plugs. Cactus.
Okay. We ready for a vote? All right, all in favor of that motion, raise your hand. That passes unanimously. Okay, the remaining portion of this item is the night vision.
So I'll make a motion that we don't change the wording to possession as outlined here in this. The new
Okay.
rule changes, yeah.
We have a motion on the table. Do we
For
have a
night
second?
vision.
Can we clarify that motion? So what I have is to not change the wording of possession and night vision as proposed by the division?
For the night vision rule change, let me pull it up.
So you're just saying to keep it as a use, right?
Correct.
Good with that, Chris?
Can someone say that in this nice sentence for me?
To keep the night vision language or night vision devices language as unlawful to use instead of unlawful to possess as it's presented by the division.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Okay, motion by Tyler, seconded by Scoot. Any questions on the motion?
Yeah, I just want to, and I should know this because I watched the video, but is that the only thing that's changed in the rule? Is that wording, or are there other things in the rule that were changed?
That's the only change to the night vision
Night
portion
okay.
of the rule. Yes.
So essentially, I just want to make clear then. So it sounds to me like what the proposal really is to reject the division's proposal for night vision change. That's really what we're saying, right? I just want to.
Yeah, and so there's two things changed in this. One was,
Okay.
it was changed from unlawful to use to unlawful to possess.
Okay.
And then there was, the ending date used to be January 31st, and we loosened that up to December 31st.
Okay.
And the way this is explained to me is this is an effort to make it more enforceable for law enforcement. And it's kind of, you put the whole puzzle together. If someone has a 300 Win Mag and a tag for that unit, and they have a night vision device in their front seat, then that kind of looks suspicious. And
Sure.
And it helps law enforcement to enforce that.
Sure. So with the current proposal, then it sounds like we are saying no to the, from use to possess, but then yes to the season date change. That's what I'm hearing, right? I just want to make sure I understand. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure.
Okay, any other comments upon the motion? Questions?
Yeah, I would just say that scenario makes a lot of sense, but there could be times when you're just looking at them. You don't have a 300 Win Mag or a tag in your pocket, but the way it's written right here would make it illegal to even look at them during those dates. And I know what you're saying, like that they might not enforce it that way, but that 100% just depends on the CO and if he wants to be cool or if he wants to stick it to you for something.
I get that. So we have a motion and a second.
Who made the motion second? Remind me.
Tyler made the motion. Scoot seconded it. We'll call for a vote. All in favor of that motion, raise your hand. Four. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I will vote in opposition to that. I do like, I know that there is that concern because you always could have a CO that had a bad day and out to make a point, but I do think that all in all, it makes it better for the law enforcement. So I'm in favor of the division's proposal, so I'll vote against that motion.
Just hire really good law enforcement guys and we'll be good.
We always do.
So can I make a motion then to accept the division's proposal on night vision as presented?
Okay, we have a.
I think we have to do that. All we
Yes.
did was vote no. So
That's right.
So
Yeah.
I make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion to
And I'll
accept
second
that.
that.
It's seconded by Sunshine. All in favor? 6 and opposed? Okay, so it passes 6-2. George, you want to indicate?
Oh, I just literally voted for the opposite. So I thought that changing my opinion there might look a little weird. But I chose that way. I didn't go into thinking it like that, but they convinced me that's the way it's written. When it's written that way, it can be interpreted, I guess, different ways, but that's the way it is on the books. So if it doesn't seem like it's probably a huge problem to me right now. I haven't heard anything about it, and if it seems to be an issue here, then I would rather it not change and stay the way it is.
Okay, and Tyler?
Eric, change me to a no just on principle for that same reason, because I just voted against.
All right. We'll move on. Item 11, the last action item. Chad, you're in a hot seat. This is the CWMU antlerless permit recommendation. Do you have any clarifications for us?
No, I think it's self-explanatory.
All right, we will open it up for questions. I will start. I have a question. I'm curious, do you have data that shows which CWMUs actually harvest the amount of cows that they're given tags for and asked to do, and overall what that percentage is, I guess? I know there are some CWMUs that are very good about harvesting the tags that they're asked to. At least my theory is that there are several that do not. Do you have information that is there some data out there that?
Yeah, we have some data on it. It's not, I guess we're not in the mandatory reporting, and sometimes with CWMUs this matters. I know, like when we have large sample sizes, we can project that out, but some of this data gets projected out. Sometimes it's a limited amount of tags. So when we look, we'll look at that, and it's something that we probably need to do better as a division is holding the feet to the fire on minimum mandatory harvest. It's something that we're redoing the CWMU rules. So lucky you guys, you get to see me again next month. And we'll probably have some more answers and solutions to those issues of ways that we can implement a little bit more hard line on their minimum harvests.
Okay, great. That's exactly what I was looking for. So any other questions for Chad?
Yeah, I got one. And Chad, I know this question is going to sound like me being a jerk, but I'm really not. I just want to make sure I understand. If a unit is over population objective, does the division typically issue cow permits to bring in that population?
Like just a CWMU unit, or are you talking the whole entire unit?
Yeah, just in general.
Yeah, usually that's one of the first things we try to to get the population under objective.
Okay.
I'll add on to that because I may know where he's going, but I want to know for myself. So in a situation like that, when you have a CWMU within a, we'll just say the Manti, if it's overpopulation, we issue cow tags. How are those, the CWMU tags, are they set similar with the same ideas? Or how are those, how's that process work?
Yeah, so in rule, it says that they need to help us manage towards objective, so towards population objectives. A lot of CWMUs, there's a lot of different scenarios, right? Like each one's unique in its own way. So generally, they work with the biologist to set those numbers. The biologist who oversees the entire unit should have an idea of where that harvest needs to come from. And if the harvest needs to come off the CWMU, then there should be a recommendation, work with them to issue more tags and get more harvest off of CWMU. Sometimes the harvest needs to be on the public. So that's where it's at right now, is there's just that latitude for CWMUs to work with the biologist and make recommendations that way.
And how does this, I know CWMUs have a wider time frame to harvest those animals. Has there been a, maybe I'm getting off track here, this is probably for our next meeting, but.
It might be.
I'll wait, I'll wait on that
But
one.
what you said, though, it is the same time frame. Like they have from August 1st to January 31st, but we can do public hunts during that 6 months as well. So it's the same amount of time, but we do open that up for all CWMUs that they do have a full 6 months to do cow harvest.
Right, but.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk more next month.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Chad? Any questions from the audience? Do you have any online comments on this one?
No comments, but survey results. 3 people answered the survey question, 33% strongly agreed, 67% neither agreed or disagreed, and that's it.
Okay, any public comment? Okay, open it up to discussion from the RAC.
So I think there's a lot more discussion to be had next RAC. I guess I want that to be clear, but even still, there were a couple things I wanted to say here. So I got to be on the CWM Rule Revisement Committee. It was a really great experience. Learned a lot of things, got to see things from a lot of different points of view. Got maybe a small taste of what the division's been dealing with for a lot of years and trying to work with, for lack of a better word, both sides of the aisle and things like that. But the informational that Chad presented in one of the videos that was on units 4, 5, 6 that the Wildlife Board specifically asked for the division to put together, I thought was super informative. My concern, though, is that I feel like the Wildlife Board was asking the wrong question. The question was, are CWMUs cutting back on their buck harvest just like the public is after this hard winter that we had? And we were shown that, yeah, they are. They're doing their part, which is great. But really what the question should be is, are CWMUs in 4, 5, and 6 harvesting enough elk to make any kind of a difference for the deer population? And I felt like, at least my interpretation of the presentation, that is not the case. And I wish that data like that maybe had been shared with us as an informational on the Rule Advisement Committee. I think it maybe could have at least had more discussion. I don't know if more productive discussion, but more discussion and a little bit more enlightening. For me, it was deeply disturbing to see that the majority of the CWMUs in 4, 5, 6 harvest more bulls than cows. So they've got the time, money, and resources to get more bulls harvested in a 61-day window then they have the time, money, and resources to get at least that many cows harvested in a 6-month window. That, for me, is a really, really big problem. And I know part of the conversation goes, well.
Cash,
Yeah.
try and cut it short. This, I agree with what you're saying, but this is more for our next meeting.
It is, but the central region recommended that we up the antlerless tags based on that presentation and the concern that we aren't harvesting at least as many cows as bulls. So if you want a short summary of what I'm saying, I was like, I would have no problem if this RAC made the same recommendation. Now, they went a little further. They said for every single elk CWMU in the state. I think that might be a little excessive. I'd be more interested in saying for any elk CWMU on a unit that is at least 20% over objective, they have to harvest, they get as many cow permits as they do bull permits. That would be something I would be interested in seeing this RAC do, because we are talking about permit allocations. So there's a collective problem here that we'll all get a chance to dive into a little bit more next time. But
yeah, I think we can talk about whether we want to increase tags or not. But as far as how tags are implemented, that falls more under the.
Sure. So like I said, I'd be fine to see a recommendation come forward about cow permits being upped on CWMUs.
Okay, any other comments, questions? I can't remember if we're questions or comments.
I agree that if there is a motion like that, that it's not just broad sweeping, though, it's a little more surgical on those places where there's some issues.
Okay, any other comments, discussion? If not, we will open it up for a motion.
I'll make a motion to support the division's recommendations as presented.
Okay, we have a motion by Sunshine to accept the division's presentation. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, Brad seconded it. Any questions or discussion on the motion? Okay, we'll call for a vote. All in favor? 7, looks like it passes 7-1. Cash is opposed, I suppose. And
I am, for the reasons I already stated. I think that elk are overpopulation right now. We're setting permit numbers right now for this year. Even if we want to wait to have the discussion for next RAC, we can't control permits this year. So if we're going to address the overpopulation of elk by thousands on 4, 5, 6, we need to do it starting now, not next year.
okay, thanks, Cash. Okay, that is our last action item. Chad, do you want to give your informational?
Yeah, it was just for the north.
Oh, sorry, I
We did
couldn't
that
see
for
it.
Northern
I didn't
Region.
have my
We'll do that at the
glasses on.
board. Yeah.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Well, then, if that's the case,
I'll second that
we'll
motion.
entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Motion and seconded, all in favor? All right, thanks, everybody. See ya.